Letter 20 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 20. I had been seeking for Annie too long already, not to have all but given up the hope of ever meeting her again. She seemed utterly vanished, but hell is large, and its inhabitants are not to be numbered. Inquiry for her quite unsettled my mode of life. I was but a vagabond, travelling hither and thither, driven onward by a gnawing need. There was a fire within me, and I thirsted. Living man, no, not the parched wanderer in the desert ever knew such agony. Thirsted for Annie, though I knew she was but as a broken cistern that can hold no water, and unable, therefore, to soothe my pain. She had lost that privilege of womanhood in life even, how much more in hell. No, Annie could not quench my thirst. In vain she keeps wringing her garments, her once glorious hair. It is wet and dripping, though never a drop of water she wrings out of it. But she carries that about with her which would solve a terrible mystery. That is why I am driven to seek her, thinking and dreaming of her as I once did in life, when the red glow coursed through my veins, and I saw in her but a flower in the vast realm of nature, unfolding her beauty for my selfish delight. But how different now! It was not love that drew me, but the dread longing to read in her face concerning that awful likeness, which had flashed through my conscience on meeting her before. It was more than a presentiment then, it seemed an assurance. Still I wanted proof to determine between doubt and certainty. She alone could be the witness that sealed my guilt. Her features had spoken, but by her mouth alone could I finally be convicted. Yet, even though I found her, could I hope to hear her voice? My heart misgave me, but endeavor to find her I must. At last, after many days, the desire seemed realized. I came upon her sitting by the river, motionless, and gazing into the turbid flow, as though about to seek death in its embrace. Hell, after all, at times offers what is akin to satisfaction. For a moment I forgot self and everything beside me, anxious only to approach her. As a gliding shadow I moved forward, scarcely to be distinguished from the crawling mists that haunt those banks of darkness. I was able to watch her leisurely, though in fevered anguish and with trembling soul, examining her countenance and questioning her every feature. It was all pain and suffering to me, but I forced myself to the task, and the result was utterly startling, an effort of the will only keeping me from jumping to my feet. How could I have believed Martin to be her very image? There was a likeness, certainly, but not more than might be merely casual. It was the first time that I experienced anything like relief in hell. Strange that it came to me by the side of that ominous river. A feeling of comfort all but superseded the pain of inquiry. My eyes devouring her greedily, yielded conviction. No, hers was no likeness to Martin that need trouble me. But there was a likeness. To whom? My satisfaction was short-lived, alas. A new horror laid hold of me, clutching my every fibre. What could it be? Doubt pursued by certainty darting through me. I saw it. Yes, yes! Annie was not like Martin. She was like that girl loved by Martin, who had been the last object of my earthly desires, whom I had lifted from poverty, but who had preferred poverty with Martin to a palace with me. It must be so. The more I gazed, the more certain I seemed. This, then, was Martin's secret that should have made all straight between us. That girl my daughter, and he, Martin, my son. I shook with horror. Again the words kept ringing in my brain that the sins of the fathers shall be visited upon the children. That girl, my child! So near had I been to commit a crime at which vice itself shrinks back appalled. My own daughter! Oh, heavens of mercy! Where indeed shall the consequences of sin find their limit? Unutterable anguish laid hold of me. There she sat, pale, gloomy, a very image of pitiless fate. A few words of hers would have sufficed to dispel the misery of suspecting doubt. But not a word she had for me. Her soul and mine were utterly apart. The time was when she followed me, though I took her to the road of hell. Now she turned from me, and had I been able to show her the way to paradise, I believe she would have spurned me with loathing. My life seems one mass of darkness, but I see innumerable lights, some heavenly, some earthly, illumining the gloom. It is more especially the countless proofs of God's fatherly goodness I call to mind. Like stars I see them shining through the night of my sinful folly. I see now how often God was near me, how often his hand was upon me to stop me in the downward course, to warn me, move me, draw me to him in unutterable mercy. How tender, how faithful, how long-suffering was he in his dealings with me, following me in pity all the days of my life, as, indeed, he follows all men. Oh, think of it, my brothers, my sisters, yea, whose eyes are not yet closed in death. He is following you, loving you daily, continually. But I spurned the touch of that hand, not caring for his love, and I am lost now, having my portion with the ungodly in the place of wailing and gnashing of teeth. I could not but be moved sometimes. The hand reaching down from heaven was too plainly to be felt. The blessings it spread about my path were too great for even me to disregard them. There were times when I felt I ought to kiss that hand of mercy, pouring out tears of repentant gratitude. My heart would be softened and stirred to the depth. If sorrow for sin was weak, yet resolutions to mend my ways seemed strong, and I believed I should never again forget how good the Lord had been. But forget I did, losing sight of everything, love, gratitude, benefit, and resolve. Aye, of God himself. Nor was it mere forgetting. No, I cared not to remember, turning away so fully that when trouble once more overtook me, I never even thought of him who had helped me and pitied me before. Yes, let me confess it loudly. It is not the fault of God that I did not come forth from earth's besetting dangers, a redeemed and blessed soul. The parable of the Good Shepherd giving his life for the sheep, how simple it is, and how it speaks to the heart, and that love is not only for the flock as a whole, but for each individual sheep, ever leaving the 99 to go after that which is gone astray. How tenderly will he seek for it, and, if so be that he find it, carry it home rejoicing. Yes, I feel it now, if I did not feel it then, that all through my sinful life there was one seeking me in sorrow and in hope. Aye, and finding me again and again, but I would not stay in the fold, preferring my own dark ways to his watchful guidance. I would not, and lo, I am lost. I never was visited by serious illness after that first trouble at the outset of manhood, till the days of my final agony, but I once suffered from inflammation of the eyes, which necessitated my abiding for several weeks in a darkened room. That was a time of misery, not merely a trial to patience, but simply awful. I gained a pretty clear idea of the signal punishment inflicted, by the solitary confinement systems in prisons. To a heart burdened with evil recollections there can be no greater misery than solitude. Days and nights were crawling past alike in gloom, and it seemed to me not only that darkness itself increased, but that I was engulfed by it more and more. And yet that darkness was but a feeble foretaste of the night enclosing me here. I thought it fearful then. It would be mercy now. I had plenty of so-called friends, but somehow not many cared to visit me. It was not pleasant, I suppose, to share my confinement and listen to my dismal grumblings. So I was left alone for the most part. Alone? Nay, I had company. My better self had a chance now of being heard. I had forgotten it, neglected it, banished it for years. But it had found me out, seizing upon my loneliness to confront me, darkness not being an obstacle. I disliked it exceedingly, yet what could I do but listen? It had come to upbraid me, contending with me, and left me no peace. There are two selves in every man, never at unity with one another, although theirs is a brotherhood closer than that of Castor and Pollux of old. Striving continuously, not because love is wanting, but because contention is their very nature. That duality in man is the outcome of sin. If he could be saved from it, sin with all its consequences would cease to enthrall him. And there is a release, as I found out in those darkened days. We wrestled without a hope of conciliation. There is not a more stiff-necked or inflexible being than what is called the better self. Not one iota would it yield, but I was to give up everything, would strip myself entirely to the death even of self. But I would not, and perhaps I could not. Yes, I could, if I would, for presently I perceived that we were not two but three, two warring, and a third one trying to mediate in earnest love. I could oppose the better self, but him I dared not contradict. I felt it too plainly that he was right, and that through him only I could be at peace with myself and begin a new life. I knew who he was, the one mediator, not only between me and that other self, but between me and the righteous God, the only begotten Son, once born in the flesh. In those days I was his prisoner. There was no escaping in the dark corner in which he faced me. The good shepherd had found the wandering sheep. His arms were about me, and he was ready to take me home. But the willingness was only on his side. I cared not. Suffering him with a negative endurance merely, and not wanting to be kept fast. There was something within me waiting but for opportunity to break away from the shepherd's hold. Nor was opportunity wanting. It is ever at hand when looked for by perversity. The evil one had nowise yielded his part in me, and required but little effort to assert it. He invented an amusement that needed no light. One of my friends was his messenger, and I received him open-armed as a very liberator. Delightful pastime, that game of hazard that could be played in the dark. We played, my friend and I. No, the enemy and myself, for my companion was no other than the Prince of Darkness. The stakes, I knew it not then, but I know it now, being nothing less than my soul's salvation. With such an expert I could of course not compete. He won. I lost. I remember a glorious evening on the Mediterranean. The day had been sultry, but towards sunset a gentle wind had risen. A cool air from the northwest, fresh and balmy, fanned the deck. The waves rose and sank in even cadence, their silvery crests sparkling far and wide. A playful troop of dolphins gamboled around the vessel. The sun had just dipped his radiant front in the cooling waters. Dashes of gold, amid a deeper glow of purple and red, burned in the western horizon, beyond the Ionian Sea, enhancing an aspect of unutterable loveliness. To our left was the splendid island of Cythera, and, rising beyond it, with clear outlines and deepening shadows, the majestic hills of Maina, where Sparta was of old. To our right the beauteous Candia, with the heaven-kissing Ida, the snowy summit of which was even now blushing in a rapture of parting light. Lily sat silent and almost motionless, leaning against the bulwark, her hands pressed to her bosom, gazing absently towards the coast of Morea. The wind played caressingly with a curl of her silky hair. I knew not what to admire most, the glorious panorama, or the girlish figure that formed so lovely a center. My eyes rested on her, drinking in her beauty. Ha! What was that? Uneasily she breathed, her chest heaving, her face turned to me with an expression of anguished distress. I saw that flush and pallor strove for the mastery in her face, and that her spirit battled against some unknown foe. "What is it, Lily?" I cried, repressing emotion. "I know not," she said with a troubled sigh. "I felt a horrible weight on my soul, but be not anxious, my friend, it is gone already." And indeed she looked herself again. I took her hand, and we sat side by side, not talking. The night descended slowly, a night of paradise. The land disappeared in folds of grey, the summit of Ida only preserving a faint flush, and the darkening dome above shone forth in myriads of sparkling lights. "What are you thinking of, Lily?" I asked, presently closing my hand on hers. "Shall I tell you, Philip?" she responded softly, looking me full in the face. "I just remembered a little story. Would you like to hear it?" And she began. "There was a poor man whose pious parents left him no heritage save an honest name and a good, God-loving heart. Now, although in this he had riches without measure, yet the world accounted him poor. It went well with him at first, but by degrees he tasted trouble. He lost the small fortune he had succeeded in saving by dint of work, and the people pointed to him, saying, 'Poor wretch!' 'No, no, not poor,' he said. 'God is my portion.' But misfortune pursued him. Most of his so-called friends turned their back on him, and those even whom he had trusted most proved faithless. He was deceived, calumniated, misjudged, and people shook their heads, saying, 'How wretched and miserable you are, to be sure!' 'No,' he said, though his voice trembled, 'not wretched, but for God is my portion.' But the greatest trouble of all now laid him low. He lost his loving wife, and soon after his only child. The suffering man stood alone in a heartless world. Again the people said, shrugging their shoulders, 'Surely now you will own yourself miserable and wretched, a very butt of trouble.' 'No,' he cried, repressing the welling tears, 'God is yet my portion.' And the people turned from him, saying he was singular and strange, and nicknaming him John Comfort in virtue of his peculiarity. But he truly was not wretched, nor indeed forsaken. The last words he was heard to speak on earth were, 'God in heaven is my portion,' and he entered into the joy of his Lord. Did Lily love me? Again and again I ask myself this question. You will think it ought to be of little consequence to me now, but not so. Since all is vanity and nothingness here, the past only remains to be looked to, and even the sure knowledge that her love was mine would be unspeakable comfort. But hell is void of comfort. Shall I ever find an answer to that question? Again and again I have gone over the whole of my intercourse with her, trying to understand her part of the relation between us. Sometimes I have seemed to arrive at a yes, and then a bitter no wipes out the happy conviction. She knew me from childhood, seeing a brother in me, no doubt, an elder brother even, for the discrepancy of years must have been against me. And she, whose heart from her tenderest youth had been directed to heaven, how should she, how could she, have fastened her affections on such a clod of earth as I was? And she died so young, in the happiest age of ideals. But still, if I call back to mind the tenderness with which she ever surrounded me, the entire devotion that yielded to me with such loving surrender, and made her look to me as to her guide and guardian, and considering that I was the only one of my sex she was brought into close contact with, I say to myself, surely she loved me. She cannot but have loved me. Not with a feeling like mine, but with her own sweet affection, that love divine, passionless and pure, which so often spoke to my soul in intercourse with her, but which never found root in my heart. And I cannot forget that in dying something seemed present with her, resembling the perfect love of holiest woman. It made efforts to flow into words, it hovered on her lips, shining in her eyes, but it found not expression. It had not reached the ripeness which speaks, and it died with her, as an unborn babe with the mother that would have given it life. Is it possible that it was love to me which, even in her last moments, glorified her beauty? Did she love me? Yes or no? Alas, I keep asking, and who shall give me an answer? She never had any secret from me. If indeed she loved me, that was the one secret, hidden surely to herself even, and she took it with her to the other life. As a dream I remember the days we spent at Bethlehem, a dream, though I hardly closed my eyes. It was with difficulty that we obtained admittance to a small cottage bordering upon the great cloister gardens. There she lay, pale as a lily, beautiful to the last, even in death. And the paler she grew, the deeper glowed the brightness of her wondrous eyes. It was as if the very star of Bethlehem she loved to think of had found a dwelling in her gaze. Nor was she white with that livid pallor which death casts on features in which his lingering touch has wrought havoc. It was rather a transparent whiteness glorifying mortality, and testifying against its victory far more loudly than health's rosiest bloom. Night followed day, and day succeeded night, the time for us flowing unmeasured. I know not how it passed. The cloister bells kept ringing almost continuously, excruciating to my grief. For it seemed to me as though, with heartless voice, they were tolling out the life of my beloved. No one heeded us, but the prior one day sent some consecrated palm branches, which appeared to delight Lily. I fastened them above her couch. As life ebbed away, her unrest increased. She asked to be moved. She was too weak herself, and as a little child I lifted her in my arms, my mother smoothing the couch. Alas, it was the first time since she had quitted childhood that I dared take her into my arms, and, unconsciously, she clasped my neck to steady my hold. Oh, the touch of love! But how late it came, late because dying. I could not keep back my tears, and they fell on her upturned face. "My friend," she said, amid heavenly smiles, my heart yet trembles at the memory. "Tears, my friend? And I so happy? I do not suffer in the least, and soon, soon it will all be over. There is but one thing grieving me. I long for the paradise of God, my soul's home, where peace and joy await me. I shall soon be there, without you, Philip, but not for long. We shall be united again where there is no more parting." Her voice was nearly inaudible, and her breathing troubled. As a spirit whisper, those words touched my ear. "My friend," she resumed after a while, How sweet it was to call you thus. Yes, Philip, I may tell you now, I loved that name for the best part of my life. Yet there was a depth of meaning in it which I seemed not to fathom entirely, however much I endeavored to be true and loving to you. I often felt you deserved a greater and fuller affection than I was able to give you, and yet those were happy moments when I tried to understand the high meaning of that sweet name. But there seemed something hidden in it, something I could not reach, which, if I had it, would make happiness perfect. I have not found it. I go to God now, and there, Philip, all will be given. We shall be calling each other friend in His presence to all eternity. The measure of happiness will be full. Her physical unease reached such a pitch that lying down became impossible. I took her into my arms, sitting down on the edge of her couch, her head leaning against my heart, and by degrees quietude returned. I sat holding her, hour merging into hour. God alone knew what I suffered. She moved not. Her eyes were closed, the slow faint breathing only, and the scarcely perceptible throbbing of her heart showed that life had not yet fled. I held her hand in mine. Cold, alas, already, and anxiously I watched the sinking pulse. I lived in its beating only, but oh, what hopeless living! The hand grew icy, the pulse becoming slower and slower. It could not last much longer. Suddenly she raised her eyes, suffused with a light of unearthly kindling, and whispered gently, "My friend!" As a fleeting breath the words escaped her lips, but I understood them, with a holy kiss bending to her brow. Again she moved her lips, but no further sound fell on my ear. She had told me once that she loved the habit of the ancient church that joined a blessing to the cross, and involuntarily I made the holy sign to her dying eyes. She understood it, a smile glorifying her features as with a reflection of heaven's peace. Vision faded, the lids closing slowly, a gentle sigh, and she was gone. Lily's dead body rested against my heart. Submission I knew not. The frail maiden had upheld me. She gone, strength and self-possession vanished. For days and weeks I was as one bereft of reason, a prey to devouring grief. But of that I speak not. End of Letter 20.
Letter 21 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 21. It is long since I wrote to you. Repeatedly I've taken up the pen, but only to drop it again in despair. It seemed impossible to describe what I have seen, but it weighs upon the heart, urging me to tell you, however feebly. Having confided so much to you, I ought not to keep this crowning experience to myself. Listen, then, to what I have to impart to you in sorrow. The great moment was fast drawing near. Darkness seemed being engulfed by the abyss more and more rapidly, light with us reaching its fullness in a transparent dawn. But far, far away, beyond the gulf, a great daybreak was bursting the confines of night. I knew the fair land of the blessed was about to be revealed. It was a wondrous radiance, increasing quickly and transfusing the distant shore with hues of unknown and indescribable loveliness. In dreams only, or when yielding to the magic of music, a faint foretaste of such glory may come to the human soul. Hell seemed captivated, the whole of its existence culminating in an all-pervading sense of dread. Millions of hungry-eyed souls drawn toward a self-same goal. Some, like pillars of salt, stood motionless, gazing into the brightening glow. Others had sunk to their knees. Others again, falling to the ground, sought to hide their faces, while some, in hopeless defiance, refused to look. But I stood in fear and trembling, forgetful of all but the vision at hand. And suddenly it seemed as if a great veil were rent asunder, torrents of light overflow in their banks, and the wide heavens steeped in flame. A sigh, bursting from untold millions of lost ones, ended in a wail of sorrow that went quivering through the spaces of hell. I heard and saw no more. As one struck by lightning, I'd fallen on my face. How long I lay thus confounded I know not, but when again I lifted my dazzled eyes, there was a clear, steady glow, a beneficent radiance that admitted of my looking into it, not blinding vision. Still I had to accustom my sight to it. It seemed a vast ocean of light that by degrees only assumed color and shape, dawning forth to the raptured gaze as a world of beauty and loveliness, such as eye has not seen and the mind is unable to grasp. But never for a moment did I doubt the reality. I knew it was the land of bliss, even paradise, unfolding to my view. At first it seemed as though islands and distant shores grew visible in that sea of light, gentle harmonies of color floating about them. But gradually the scattered parts united, forming a perfect whole, a world of bliss immeasurably vast. Yet infinite as it appeared, it formed but a single country, a garden abounding in blessing, in beauty, in delight. The loveliest spots on earth are as desert places in comparison. I have no other words to describe it. To do so fully and justly I had need to be an angel, and you know what I am, one who might have been an angel, but lost now and forever undone. Trembling with awe and enchantment, I gazed into paradise, deeper and deeper, encompassing, no doubt, thousands of miles. For strange as the aspect was, the power of vision given was stranger still. My spirit seemed roaming through vast realms of glory, all their beauties laid bare to my tranced sense. I felt the balmy breezes, I heard the rustle of trees, the gentle cadence of waters. It was given me to every perfect fruit, every lovely flower, every drop of dew reflecting the light. I saw, heard, felt, drank in the fill of beauty. There was music everywhere, speaking the language of nature glorified. Not a dewdrop sparkling, not a treetop rustling, not a flower opening, but it swelled the heavenly psalm. All sounds floating together in harmony, wondrous and pure. And yet I saw no living soul, but songs of joy, of exultant praise resounded everywhere. Nature and spirit uniting in one perfect hymn. What shall I say but that infinite bliss, unspeakable happiness, and heavenly peace flashed delight into my soul with 1,000 daggers of longing. This then was Eden. I seemed all but in it, and yet how far, how far! Of all that glory not a ray of light for me, not a flower even, or a drop of dew. O gracious heavens, not a drop of water, not a single tear. But where were they, the souls whom no man hath counted, the saved ones, redeemed from the world? Not one of them I had seen as yet. The garden seemed as untrodden of human feet as on the day when Adam and Eve had been driven forth by him with a flaming sword. Where are ye, my loved ones, if not in the heaven I see? My heart cried out for them, longing, thirsting, Aunt Betty somehow rising first to my mind. Why she, I cannot tell, since there is another far dearer and dearer to my soul. But while I thought of her, behold herself! Yet there she was, I opening my sorrowful arms to clasp her. But ah me, there is a great gulf fixed, and no passing across it. Yet I saw her, dear Aunt Betty, saw her as plainly as though I need but stretch forth my hand to draw her to my embrace. It was she, and yet how changed! Gloried to youth and beauty everlasting, the same to recognizing vision, but perfected and spotless as the white raiment she wore. Some happy thought seemed moving in her as she walked the paths of content, crowned with a halo of peace. I saw she was happy, I saw it in the light of her eyes and the smile hovering about her mouth. She had conquered, and sorrow and grief had vanished with the world. I was deeply moved to the pouring forth of my soul even in weeping. But what boots emotion if the eyes are a dried-up well? I thought of the love and self-forgetting kindness she had ever shown to me in the days of her life. Now only I knew how much she had been to me. Now only I understood her. For marvelous yet true, I not only saw her, I was permitted even to read her heart. All she had suffered, her every battling and victory, lay open to my view as a finished tale. Yes, I understood her as I had never done before. Long ago, when she was young, my father had been a true brother to her in a time of bitter sorrow, offering her the shelter of his love when she found the world empty and cold. She had never forgotten that, her grateful heart vowing to him the remainder of her life in the service of sisterly devotion. She had kept that vow fully, fondly. That was the key to her life, and her beautiful sacrifice of love enriched not only my father, but all she could help and cherish, souls without number, of whom I was chief. My father, Lily, my heart was reverting to both simultaneously, and oh, rapture! I beheld them, even now emerging from a shady grove. Aunt Betty seemed to be meeting them. The sight of Lily was more than I could bear, a film overspreading my senses. It seemed at first as though both had appeared but to vanish. But no, in perfect clearness and heavenly calm these beloved ones moved to my vision. Nothing of outward beauty, nor yet of the heart's secret mystery, being hid from me. Truly I had never known them, never seen them aright before. O Lily, beautiful even on earth and of sweetest womanhood, but surpassingly beautiful in the fullness of paradise. Mortal eye has not seen such loveliness glorified to transcendent charm. Nay, human imagination is too poor to reach even to the helm of her garment. Holy and sanctified seemed to be written in her every feature, surrounding her with a halo of praise. It spoke from her crown of glory, from the palm of victory she carried, from her robe of righteousness whiter than snow. And as she lifted her shining eyes, it was as though their gaze enfolded me. I trembled and glowed, as a flickering flame, touched by a kindling breath. And that angel smile of perfect bliss accompanying the look seemed meant for me, even me. But that was illusion. None of them can see us here. Thank God, I saw her. She was near me in spirit vision, but in truth she was far, far away, and the blessed ones in paradise are saved from the thought of hell and its every horror. Yet the separating gulf does not separate me from her inmost thought. Woe is me! Shall I weep, or dare I rejoice? I can read in her pious heart as in an open book. Ah me, what do I read? I see it as in clearest writing that she loved me with all her soul. Truly, if unconsciously, with the deepest, purest giving a virgin bride. Aye, more, she loves me still. She is thinking of me, longing for me with a longing as painless as pure. For it is in hell only that pain and grief are known. What more can I say? Hopelessness, my daily portion, is as a blazing fire feeding on my soul, sometimes sinking in ashes, but never dying. At that moment of sweetest, bitterest conviction, the flames seem fostered by denial, the very essence of hell. Bliss and delight veering round to despair, my whole miserable existence flared up in an all-consuming agony. See what might have been yours, but you have lost it. Lost was the ever-recurring cry of my tortured soul. Can you wonder that I hardly heeded my good pious father who walked beside her, sharing her felicity? That I cannot remember a single word passing between them, nay, heard not for very anguish? Had I been quiet to listen, no doubt I would have heard mention of my name, might have heard them speak of me in heavenly tenderness. But having seen Lily, and read in her very heart the assurance that she loved me, I heard and saw no more. See what might have been yours, but you have lost it. Lost! I writhed in despair. Vain was my effort to lift eyes to her once more. I could not, and with a cry of horror I fell back upon myself. End of letter 21.
Letter 22 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 22. Since you heard from me last, and there seems to have been a longer pause than usual, I have roamed about in aimless adventure. There are no accurate means of estimating either distance in hell or the speed of our travels. I expect that both are astounding. Time and space here can only be spoken of in an abstract sort of way, as existing in thought merely. Consequently, there are hardly two souls amongst us that would agree concerning the measure of either, but that holds true of anything. Since everything, then, is imaginary, unanimity is merely accidental, and what is called harmony on earth not to be found here. That a number of souls by social instinct, and under force of habit, should unite at a given place for a given object by no means is proof of concord. For concord presupposes liberty, whereas such souls are under downright compulsion, and, apart from the instinct which drives them in a common direction, no wise at unity among themselves. My roamings, then, are no free will undertaking. Whenever I feel especially miserable and desponding, there is a sense of relief in dashing about blindly with no other object but that of moving. Blindly, I say, meaning heedless of obstacles, pushing through walls, mountains, houses, trees, through living creatures even if they are in my way. The latter, of course, is not altogether pleasant. Fancy rushing through man or beast in your aimless hurry. But one gets used to everything here. "Oh, distracted soul!" your neighbor cries, and is satisfied you should pass. We are always suiting ourselves to circumstances, you see. Are you surprised that I should yield to such madness of motion? True, everyone here has his or her congenial abode. So have I, leading, as you know, a sickening life. But I am helpless once the frenzy seizes me, unhinging my very existence, and away I hie me, as driven by despair. Yes, that it is, despair and nothing else, engendering a need, amounting to passion almost, of trying to escape from oneself, or at least to stupefy oneself. Neither the one nor the other is possible. In the world one succeeds at times, never in hell. But that knowledge does not restrain me. Again and again I perceive the utter uselessness of endeavor, pulling up suddenly, perhaps, to find myself in the strangest of places, and more horribly strange, more dismal than any, is the place from which I lately returned. As a maddened fool I felt driven thither, as a maddened fool I hurried back, utterly confounded. I suppose every soul here is forced to perform that journey once at least, and in so far it might not unaptly be called a pilgrimage, but to a frightful shrine. Whether it is on account of a certain inexplicable mania possessing us all sooner or later, or merely by dint of a dread attraction exercised by that awful place, I know not. But no one escapes the fate of going thither once, if not oftener. You know what a crowd is drawn by a public execution, that people will assist at so dire a spectacle unless positively prohibited. It is strange, but what should you say if any one by morbid attraction had a longing to watch his own execution? Something very like this takes place here. You are aware by this time, and must be so, apart from my inadequate account, that between this evil place and paradise a great gulf is fixed. Great, I say, and would add frightful. But that words invented for earth's needs are altogether unfit to describe that gulf. It is the home of Satan. Do you understand that? In the depth of that abyss the quenchless fire is burning, forever tended by the devil and his host. How far away is it? I cannot tell. I think it is in the outmost limit of hell. How near one may approach it? Even at a distance of hundreds of miles, one feels seized with a giddiness and all the horrors of death. But one is drawn nevertheless. That one should ever escape it again seems marvelous. How wide the gulf is? When lit up by the radiance of paradise, the eye at a leap seems to carry you across. But I doubt not it may be likened to a shoreless ocean. Light now is fast decreasing, swallowed up by the darkness rising afresh from the abyss. Do you expect me to describe to you that abode of terror? But I can no more depict it than I was able to give a true representation of paradise. It is beyond human possibilities, and I am but human, even in hell. Yet one thing I may tell you, believe me, that more than one rich man is to be found by the awful pit, looking across to where they see the blessed poor in Abraham's bosom, stretching forth their arms too, and entreating for a drop of water to cool their tongue. But that first rich man of the gospel does not appear to be among them. There is a rumor that perchance he was saved. Alas! I was among those begging rich, supplicating with all my soul, but no one heard me. Despair urged me to fling myself into the awful gulf, that perchance I might lose myself amid the howling fiends of the bottomless pit. What power prevented me, and eventually brought me back from the place, I know not. Is it possible that God, in his mercy, is yet keeping me? I have returned then, dreading I shall be carried thither a second time. I must tell you more, though it be a subject of horror both to you and to me. But then all these revelations are fraught with horror, and these letters had better remain unread by those whose self-complacent tranquillity of mind dislikes being harassed. As I returned shivering in every fibre, and conscious of the thought only of Satan and his angels, I all but fell into the arms of one coming towards me on his way to the gulf. But was it a human being, this creature with mangled body and frightfully disfigured countenance? A man indeed, his very appearance bespeaking his name, Judas Iscariot. A piece of rope was round his neck, and in his hand he carried 30 pieces of silver. The rope all but suffocates him, and the money burns his fingers. He keeps throwing it away, but it always returns to his grasp. I have heard that it may be absent a while swelling some usurer's gains, but Judas before long finds it in his closed hand again, bearing the marks of blood. And then he is heard to groan, "What is that to us? See thou to that." A fruitless repentance, which is not repentance, eating away at his soul, and he spends himself in vain efforts to get behind someone, and seize him by the neck. What he intends by this is not quite clear, but people think he is anxious to find a charitable soul who will give him back the kiss he once gave to his Lord and Master. and thereby free him from those horrible pieces of silver. But the soul lives not in hell who would care to save him at the cost even of a kiss. He is an object of repugnance to everyone. I, too, burst away from him, horrified. I came across a scrap of newspaper the other day, and my eye was caught by an advertisement offering bridal bouquets and funeral wreaths in great variety. And just beneath it a stationer expressed his willingness to sell hand-painted cards for the menu of wedding breakfasts and, in memoriam, of the dead. Such is life, I said. Side by side grow the flowers for the adorning of brides and the crowning of corpses. Better sometimes the latter than the former. Better to be clasped in the embrace of death than find love dying before its time. Memorial cards, how touching and how cheap! How we love to speak of the virtues of our departed ones, mourning them ostentatiously, and assuring the world we shall miss them forever. Forever? Look into your own heart, my friend, and expect not to be remembered too long when you are gone. Love's wreaths will fade on your grave, and the night winds alone will keep up their moaning around it. What is this buzzing about me like troublesome flies? Memories? I once had taken a youth into my service. He was a kind of legacy of Aunt Betty's, and for her sake I intended to be kind to him. But somehow I was always finding fault with him. There are people who rouse our evil nature, for no reason one can see. Poor fellow! Perhaps he was not over bright, though he tried his best. But patience was not one of my virtues. I scolded him almost continuously, taking a kind of satisfaction, I believe, in thus revenging myself on what I considered his stupidity. I well remember the many hard words I flung at him, provoked from bad to worse by his meek, sorrowful countenance. At last I said I could not bear his fool's face any longer, and gave him warning. I did help him to another place, where, I fancy, he was more kindly used than with me. But it was a disheartening beginning for one who had to make his way in service, and he had deserved better at my hands. When he had left me, I discovered all sorts of little proofs of his touching fidelity and grateful disposition. How badly I had rewarded the poor fellow for such golden qualities! It could not be called a great matter, but it left a sting. My town residence had the rare amenity of a little garden. It was shut in at the farther end by a blind wall, forming the back of a humble dwelling in the rear. But the wall was not quite blind. It had one little window not far from the ground, to my notion, the one eye of the house which kept looking into my privacy. I had no need to think so, for behind that window sat a poor seamstress who had something more to do than watch my movements. True, she would now and then look up from her needle, as if she delighted in my garden, and she even dared sometimes to put her head out of window to enjoy the fragrance of my flowers. There could be no harm in that, but I disliked it, and availing myself of the letter of the law, I ran up a paling a few feet from the wall. The right of doing so was mine, but it was very wrong. The poor creature had delighted in my garden, the proximity of which had helped her through many a joyless day. She loved flowers, and the sight of green things was grateful to her hard-worked eyes. There were a few thrushes in the garden, and she was cheered by their song. My fence was simply cruel, depriving her not only of these enjoyments, but of fresh air as well, and of the light she sorely needed. I had shut her out from her share of the sky. I had acted heedlessly, and I came to see it before long. Good nature even was stirred, and I actually resolved to make amends. I went round to the back street, but was too late. The poor girl had been obliged to leave her little room, over which the struggles of 10 lonely years had thrown a halo of home. Neither was this a great matter, but little things make up the sum of good or evil in life. I feel sore at heart. I had gone out riding one day. It was in the country, and I intended to look up a farmer in a small village, but did not know his house from the surrounding homesteads. The place seemed asleep in the noonday sun, not a youth within hail to whom I might have thrown the bridle. Looking about, I saw an open cottage door and the figure of a young girl appearing on the threshold. I called her, and she promised to mind the animal, seeming half shy, half ready to please me. I went on my business, and, returning, came upon an interesting spectacle. The mare had become unmanageable. The young girl could hardly hold her, feeling evidently distressed by the creature's pranks. Her efforts to subdue its gambols served as an admirable foil to her figure. Her every movement was charming, and her pretty face reflected so delightfully both fear and vexation, that instead of hastening to her assistance, I stood still behind a shrub watching complacently what I considered an exquisite scene. There was no danger involved. The mare was not vicious, only frolicsome. But the rustic beauty did not understand that, and was evidently frightened. Holding fast by the bridle, jumping now right, now left, her lithe figure following the capering animal. It was merely to ingratiate herself with the damsel that the mare tossed its head, plunging again as if to snap at her kerchief, which now slipped from her shoulders, revealing the whitest of necks. And behold, the masses of golden hair escaped their confinement, falling in a shower of ringlets as though to veil her charms. Her distress increased visibly, a deep glowing mantling her features, her bosom heaving. Now on tiptoe, now curving her outstretched arms, bending this way, bending that, she delighted me with her graceful movements. But there was a sudden end to my enjoyment. She caught sight of me, and I was obliged to approach. Had she let go the mare, it would have been no more than I deserved, but she held on faithfully till I was near enough to take hold of the bridle myself. There she stood, burning with shame and anger, her eyes brimming with tears. Before I mounted, I endeavored to slip half a crown into her hand, but she turned from me proudly, the coin rolling at her feet. Surely no great matter. I had wronged the girl by being unkind to her, while reveling in the sight of her beauty, but she came to no harm. On the contrary, I have a sort of conviction that the little adventure proved a useful lesson, teaching her to beware of admiring fops. Nevertheless, memories will not be silenced. Justice is the law of life, be it in the world, or in heaven, or in hell, and every act of man, though it contain but a shadow of wrong, calls for atonement, unless God himself in his mercy will blot it out. I know it now. I know it. Who shall free me from even such guilt? Do you see that tree? Often and often I sink down beneath it with groans of regret, for on its branches are gathered the opportunities of a wasted life. They keep falling down on me, ready to crush me. I am often driven thither by the lashes of the awful inevitable. How happy I might have been, how much I might have done in the days of golden possibility. But I would not. As a blind man I walked in life, careless of light. It is dark now, but I can see, I do see, the failure of my days. End of Letter 22.
Letter 23 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 23. If memory takes me to the Holy Land now, I seemed to roam through its length and breadth as a broken-hearted pilgrim, questioning every spot for the Saviour of men, but unable to find him, with whom there is forgiveness of sin. In the blessed days I spent there, actually, peace was offered me daily, hourly, but I was too much engrossed with my own vain thoughts to be anxious for the unspeakable gift. An angel of God walked beside me, whose influence over me was marvelous. Lily's faith and piety were as sunbeams to my heart. I felt the vivifying touches, and more than once was near yielding up my sinful being, my life and all, for so precious a Saviour, her Saviour, who was ready to be mine. But at the decisive moment, self-love, writhing in agony, shot up within me as a flame of hell, blinding the eyes. I saw not him, but only a fair girl by my side, the aim of my earthly hopes, and all but mine already, who, alas, should soon cost me the hardest of all conflicts, even a wrestling with death. O Galilee, thy land of beauty, how fine is the contrast between Judea, dark, wild, and waste, and thine own fair, genial tracts, and of all places none more sublime than Mount Tabor. In glorious solitude it rises from the broad expanse, lifting a precipitous front, north, south, east, and west, clothed to the top with woods and shrubberies. Its evergreen oaks and pines seem to vie in beauty, and the place is rich in aromatic plants. Never anywhere have I met such freshness, such exuberance of nature. From the south only the mount is accessible, a path winding to the very summit, revealing fresh charms of landscape at every turn. And rising from the sunburnt plain, you enter regions of air more pure and balmy than you ever dreamt of. The way is longer than you expected, but repays you amply, and as you reach the summit, behold a tableland of some 3 miles in circumference, an expanse of richest greensward and splendid groups of trees. You enter this retreat of beauty by a ruined gate in the west. Remains of enclosures and turrets, of grottos and cisterns, meet the eye at every turn, memorials of a mysterious past which tell of an encampment or even a city that may have stood here. But now peace has her dwelling there, if anywhere in the world, with a sense of security and calm. No wonder that Peter exclaimed, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias." We had begun the ascent towards evening, and though it was but March, the day had been oppressively hot. It was like a deep draught of refreshment, therefore, to reach the cool, balmy height. We felt as though admitted into paradise. Just before sunset we gained the top, and finding ourselves unexpectedly upon that glorious tableland, commanding so boundless a view, a deep silence fell upon us. The whole of Galilee, nay, the greater part of the Holy Land, at our feet. I looked towards Lily, for it was through her that the best of impressions at all times reached me. The setting sun was weaving a halo about her, casting a roseate glow on her beauty, which more than ever looked as though it were not of earth. I had often felt this, but never so fully before, and the glory of earth and sky about us seemed as nothing compared to the uplifting radiance that spoke to me from Lily's face. She stood wrapped in worshipping delight. Bear with me, my friend, if I seem lengthy, carrying thee back again and again to scenes dead and gone. It may seem foolish in a poor lost one like me, but even that is not of my choice. I am forever driven back upon my own past, and what was happiness then is misery now. Aye, hopeless despair. Towards the north we looked away over the hills of Galilee to the snowy peaks of Lebanon and the regions of Damascus. Nestling at our feet were the little towns of Galilee, Cana, Nazareth, and Nain, with their holy memories. Westward lay the plain of Esdrahalon, steeped in charm, with Carmel beyond, and the sea suffused with the light of the setting sun. Brook Kyson, winding through the valley like a ribbon of sheen, guides the eye to the headland overhanging the Mediterranean. Turning to the east, your gaze is captured by the beauty of Lake Gennesareth, with the small town of Tiberias, now in ruins. Not far off is Capernaum, and beyond the lake the desert where Christ fed the multitude. To the south are Mount Hermon and the hills of Samaria. Further still, beyond Jericho, the lonely height where the Son of God fasted and was tempted by Satan. Your eye wanders away over Jordan to Bethabara, where John baptized, over the Red Sea to Mount Nebo, in the land of the Moabites, where Moses died, and in the distant haze you descry the boundless desert of Arabia. The sun was sinking, nay, it fell into the sea, glowing like a ball of flame, and sudden darkness overspread the land. But our people had been busy. A tent was ready to receive my mother and Lily, for we intended to spend the night on Tabor. Our mules enjoyed their liberty, and the succulent grass. A fire had been lit with odoriferous branches of cedar, and a simple supper was being prepared. Every hand was busy, excepting the Turks, our escort, who looked on, lazily contemplative, enjoying their evening hookah. Those sunset scenes making ready for the night, how soothing they had always been to my restless soul. But that evening on the mount in Galilee was one of the last restful evenings I knew on earth. When darkness had set in, we lit more fires and placed the necessary outposts, for nowhere in the Holy Land is one safe from an attack of Bedouins. But it was easy to secure our position here. The place was a fortress in itself. Having retired within the tent, we passed an hour by the subdued glow of a lamp, Lily presently taking her Bible and reading to us the story of the Transfiguration. Her voice to me was ever as a cool hand laid on an aching brow, sufficient in itself to attune my soul to worship. I listened, anxious to listen. Yet it was but as a transient breath of even in a sultry atmosphere. My spirit soon would flag, fluttering helplessly and unable to rise. "Do you feel comfortable, Lily?" said I, on wishing her good night. "Oh, yes," she replied, with one of her happy smiles. "I should like to live and die here." I knew from her manner, and her eyes told me, that she had more to say. I bent my ear, and she whispered, "Do not forget to say your prayers, Philip, on lying down tonight. Remember that our Lord prayed here for you also." A breath of life to touch me. My soul raised her wings. I went out deeply moved. My couch was prepared just outside the tent. I laid myself down wrapped in a burnous, but not to dispose myself to sleep at once. I must say my prayers. A prayer from the heart, I think, I had not known since the days of my childhood. Of late I had been trying, but always felt that something was wanting. Alas, not merely something, but the thing that constitutes prayer, uplifting the heart towards God. I really endeavored to collect my thoughts, but hither and thither they roamed against my will. It seemed vain for me to fold my hands, to move my lips. The spirit of prayer was absent. And yet I could not think of sleeping without first having prayed. Stillness seemed to have settled within the tent, but I outside could not rest me and be still. I looked up, wakeful, toward the starry sky. It seemed so near, but there was no peace in that feeling. It oppressed me. The enclosing firmament was like a prison. The voices of night began to work on my fancy, and restlessness fevered my blood. There were sounds all about me, wild boars breaking through the brushwood and jackals howling in the plain. The call of a night bird in the trees mingled with the strange gruntings of the sleeping Turks, who in dreamful unease added their share to the concert of discord that filled my ear. It was midnight. My repeater announced it as clearly as a church bell, I thought. I tossed impatiently, gazing into the dying embers. There was something quieting in the sinking glow. It held me still. And presently I thought I heard Lily's voice, reading how the Saviour was transfigured on the mount. Yea, and I saw him standing between Moses and Elias in heavenly glory. Upon that vision I closed my eyes, and behold, my soul had been praying. The spirit, freed for a moment from the trammels of the flesh, had risen to him, I could sleep now, and sleep quietly till dawn. The glow was deepening on the heights of Ashtaroth, beyond the Sea of Galilee, as I approached the northern slope. I was standing by a choked-up cistern, awaiting the yet veiled glory with eyes riveted on the eastern sky, when a light figure came up behind me. It was Lily, quietly putting her arm within mine. We spoke not, but together we gazed toward the far shore of morning that overflowed with light. How sacred was its calm! But now the sun appeared, a wellspring of splendor, flashing from height to height, and setting a halo on Carmel. For the west lay steeped in wonder, and the sea caught every sparkling beam. "Oh, Philip, surely this is the beauty of holiness," whispered Lily. "Let us praise the Lord." I had no words, but wrapped my burnous about her, for a cold wind swept the mount. The valleys lay yet hidden in mist and darkness, but there seemed a fluttering movement in the cloudy coverlet, a sudden rent, and through it appeared a shining cupola and the white glittering walls of a little town, like a revelation from another world. "Nazareth!" cried Lily in happy surprise. "Oh, Philip, look! We have it all here! Sweet gracious Nazareth and holy Tabor!" He humbled himself, yet was the beloved Son in whom the Father was well pleased. She only said "he" as the thought of him moved in her heart, filling her soul. I had no need to ask her meaning. How wide were her sympathies, how keen her perception of beauty, but her deepest life owned him Lord, and him alone. The sun having fully risen, we walked back to the tent. "It is here he was transfigured," said Lily, presently, stopping short and looking about her with reverential awe. But not yet had he accomplished what he had come to do, the will of his Father, to the death, even to the cross. Not yet had he drunk the bitter cup, Gethsemane, Gabbatha, Golgotha. But here for a moment he was uplifted into the glory that awaited him at the right hand of God, and thus strengthened he went forth to the humiliation and suffering that lay before him. "Philip," she added, "is not this a holy example for all God's children? We too have a path of sorrow to tread, many a trial to go through, but we too may have a foretaste of the joy to come, the perfect liberty promised, and it may help us to reach the end. Without this grace divine, many a burdened soul might fail on the road, for life seems hard at times. We've been strengthened by a vision on this mount. My heart is very full, my spirit rejoices. Let me join in the new song to the glory of the Lamb." Was that Lily? Yet it was not for the first time she had spoken out of the fullness that moved her. Every day of late had made her more fit for heaven. Even I saw it. But I trembled at the inward beauty she unfolded, which seemed one with her ardent desire to go behind the veil. "I cannot help telling you, dear," she continued, clinging to me for support. "I feel as if I could not breathe again down there in the everyday world. It is a happy feeling, yet fraught with pain. I do not say I would give the rest of my life, but I would give much for a few quiet days up here." "Would it really make you happy, Lily?" said I, sadly. "Oh, yes, Philip, and well, too. I seem to breathe easier, and my heart is free." "Well, then, ask Mother about it. I am satisfied with whatever pleases you, sweetest Lily." The mountains seemed to stir now, and the encampment full of life. Our people were wide awake, Turks and all, some making coffee, others baking cakes of wheat or maize on heated stones, others again tending the animals or polishing their arms. The Turks looked on complacently. Having accomplished their matutinal devotions, they lighted their pipes and allowed others to do the work. But there was life, too, beyond the camp. Herds of goats browsing far and near. A cool wind played about the tree-tops, and the flowers looked more gay in the light of morning. My mother raised no objection to Lily's desire. She had been strangely ready of late to humor her, from a feeling perhaps that we should not have her much longer. So we remained, and we all liked it. It was, to tell the truth, a charming mode of spending a few days, camping gypsy fashion on so lovely a spot, high above the workaday world, with a view over all the land, the Holy Land, and the purest of atmospheres, amid scenes of nature, rich, balmy, and fragrant as Eden itself, in an absolute calm. It was a time of blessing, truly. And Lily revived. There was no troubled beating of the heart, no sudden throbbing of the pulse. I knew, for often I would hold the dear little hand quietly nestling within mine. No telltale flushes dying away in pallor. Her face wore a delicate bloom. I almost believed in the wonder-working power of the sacred mount. I was myself again, casting fears to the wind, and added my share to the happiness of the moment. In the course of the forenoon, pilgrims of every hue and nation arrived, with cripples and sufferers in the rear. Fortunately, our encampment was at some distance from the actual sanctuary, which saved us from being overrun. It was a sad and almost sickening sight, but Lily did not think so. On the contrary, she was all sympathy, yearning to help where she could. To the poor she offered money, to the sick medicine, the comfort of a helpful word to all. Love trembled in her eyes, gathering sweetly at her lashes. How beautiful she was, her dress half Eastern and altogether charming. How lovely she looked, gliding about from one miserable pilgrim to another. And they all understood her, knowing never a word of her language. Towards evening I received a visit from the chief who had undertaken to be responsible for our safety from Nazareth to Samaria. He had been hunting on the mount, and was now coming with a splendid retinue to pay his respects to me and present me with a wild boar he had killed. Of course I had to return the compliment, and indeed his attention to me was worthy of an acknowledgment. True, he robbed me of the precious evening I had intended to spend alone with my mother and Lily, instead of which I now was obliged to play the amiable host, presiding at an extemporized feast. I did my best. In conversation, too, which, helped on by a dragoman, was a patron of flowery speeches. One comfort was left. Lily watched us from the distance and seemed intensely amused. The emir, on quitting, expressed himself highly sensible of my attempts to do him honor, and with thankworthy politeness. He pitched his camp halfway down the mount, leaving the upper domain to ourselves. But enough. It is no healthy craving that urges me to enlarge upon this sort of thing amid the horrors of hell. You may turn for the rest of it to Chateaubriand or Lamartine if you like. Fool that I am, even in the realms of death. End of Letter 23.
Letter 24 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 24. Adventures of all kind are of daily occurrence here, but they are void of interest. Like everything else in hell, they mock us with emptiness, mere shadows of things left behind. Not long ago, at a lonesome spot, a young woman flung herself into my arms, not for love of me, but for horror of another. She was being pursued, and a sensation of fear, natural to her sex, started her into a show of weakness. It was foolish in her. She might have known that she could not really be harmed, and that whatever cause of fear there might be, I had no power to help her. But such things will happen here. We live in the notions brought hither from the world, no matter how clearly we see them to be meaningless. It was quite conceivable, then, that the tender creature I held in my arms should have been sufficiently distressed to seek the protection of my manhood. I gave her time to recover herself, and then inquired into the nature of her alarm. She lifted a pair of eyes to me, tenderly trustful, like a turtle dove's, but trembling afresh, as if the very question were too much for her shy and gentle disposition. However, she found courage to reply. "He is always after me. I do not know his name. He is seeking for Beatrice. He fancies I am she." I knew at once whom she meant. That man is one of the public characters in hell, if I may say so. It is an ill-chosen expression, but descriptive terms acquired in the world are apt to be inadequate here. In hell all are public, yet none is so in the sense you would attach to that word. What I mean to convey is simply this, that the man she spoke of is known throughout the regions of hell, pointed at by young and old, and that, wherever he goes, he is mocked with his own constant cry, "Where is Beatrice? Can anyone tell me where to find her?" This question is forever in his mouth. Beatrice seems his one thought, and the getting hold of her his mania. He is convinced she must be in hell. "For," says he, but let me cast a veil over the poor girl's history. Enough that he seeks her with such brutish eagerness as I have not known even in this place. But he looks for her in vain. Were it possible for him to find her, even hell would shudder at the probable deed. He is one of the most repulsive beings I have met, and that, surely, means a good deal here. He must be vice personified, all human feelings burnt out of him, nothing remaining but the one wild inhuman passion that has possessed him. And then the horrible wounds disfiguring his body, his lifeblood forever gushing through every one of them. He is a refuse of the vilest in hell. No wonder that the poor shamefaced creature was filled with horror at the sight of him. "Then you are not Beatrice?" I said. "No," she replied with the meekest of looks. "I am Emily." Our acquaintance did not proceed farther on that occasion, but I somehow felt sure I should meet her again. Having left her for the present, I could not but occupy my mind with her. How was it possible, I thought, that such a creature as this Emily should have come to hell? She seemed an image of fairest womanhood. True, beauty alone is no safeguard. On the contrary, some of the most favored in this respect would seem to be here. But her utter gentleness and simple-hearted sweetness, her modest bearing, must be genuine, I thought. A veil of purity seemed to be cast about her, despising dissimulation. There was a grace not only in her face and figure, but in her every movement, that might well claim to be the garment of an innocent soul. And then, so young, a very child to the world, surely. She must be 19, but one would hardly credit even that. I saw she had been married, for she wore a ring, but she looked hardly grown up. Now, the true simplicity of innocence is admired by the most worldly even. How justly so may be inferred from the fact that it does not exist here. It is rare on earth, but some women seem to preserve the heart of childhood in spite of the promptings of the flesh and the devil. Emily, to all appearance, seemed to be one of these chosen few. As a grown child she looked, whose feet could never have been soiled with the mire of the world. How, then, did she come to wake in hell? Involuntarily, I thought of the awful truth that the heart is unclean by nature, no matter what graces may twine about it, and though its lot be cast in the fairest of paths. I met her again before long, and, unnoticed by her, watched her at leisure. She sat apart, deeply engrossed, and offering a sight both attractive and singular. Her attire was of cloister-like simplicity, utterly white, the ample folds enveloping her slender form, purely white from top to toe, without a shadow of coloring, and contrasting strangely with the surrounding darkness. One thing only seemed wanting to crown the indescribable gracefulness of her appearance with the perfection of beauty — peace, which of course she had not. Her delicately shaped hands moved busily in her lap. I discovered after a while that a precious necklace occupied her attention, the pearls of which she kept counting, now beginning at one end, now at the other, but always stopping at the center, and dropping it again to wring her hands. I fancied I saw tears in her eyes, but that, of course, was not so. I moved up to her presently. "Are you la Dame Blanche?" I said. It was a stupid question, since there are so many ladies owning this title. But she only shook her head, saying, "No, I am Emily Fleming." "Fleming and Sparkman?" I ejaculated, surprised, naming a highly respected firm. She nodded, heaving a deep sigh. What could she mean? Was she some member of a well-known family? But she, meanwhile, had replaced the pearls on her neck, sitting motionless with folded hands. I hasten to add that no one ever succeeds here in folding hands aright. That also is of the past. She appeared lost in sorrowful thought. "Poor child," I cried, "you seem very unhappy." "Yes, yes, I am," she sobbed. "I have sustained a loss which I can never make good." "What is it you have lost, poor Emily?" A pearl," she murmured, wringing her white little hands. "A pearl," I echoed. "A slight thing, surely, to be cast into hell for, and yet there are goodly pearls. Was not there a man who sold all he had, that he might buy one pearl of great price?" "Well, perhaps you may find it again," I said, anxious to be kind, but it was foolish. "Do you think so?" she said, brightening. "But alas, I have sought for it for years and years." The memory of a promise seemed hovering about me, that those who seek shall find, but I could not shape the words, and only said vaguely, "If you have sought so long already, you may be all the nearer the finding." It was the vainest of speeches, but it broke down the reserve about her heart. She seemed to trust me, and before long she told me the history of her life. It cost her a real effort to do so. I saw that well enough. But the longing to unburden oneself is irresistible with us. And, moreover, the veil of secrecy is always being lifted here from every soul. "You seem to be acquainted with the house of Fleming and Sparkman," she began. "Perhaps the present heads of the firm were known to you. But my history takes me back, let me see, for 7 generations. How long it seems!" As a light-hearted girl of 16, I became the bride of Robert Fleming, and he brought me, a happy young wife, to the old family house. On the day we were married, he gave me a precious necklace, worth a man's ransom, as the saying is, and before fastening it on my neck, he spoke to me about every pearl in particular, adding a meaning to their value which comes back to me now with terrible force. The large blue pearl in the center, a gem rather, he said, signifies your wedded troth, the deep red one your true love, and that white one your innocence. The lesser pearls on both sides make up the number of wifely virtues, each pearl for a grace, and there are many, you see, and that which holds them together, making them your own precious adornment, is chastity and womanly honor. With his own hand he fastened the costly gift on my neck. His words had impressed me but slightly. I was young and delighted in the splendid ornament. But alas, the time came when I could but remember them in tears. Look at my necklace. The pearls are all there, but the central gem is missing, and the loss of that pearl has ruined me. Did I love my husband? I do not know what to say honestly. Perhaps I did not love him as I might have loved another. But I must own that wedded life at first seemed happy. He loved me, and 2 sweet little babies crowned our union. All went well till a family friend of my husband's entered our house, a man as false as fair. I cannot tell how it was, but he cast a spell over me. Was it that I loved him? The affection I felt for my husband was quite different, and I am sure it was true, but he somehow had never waked in me the intoxicating rapture which that other one called forth. I felt it welling up in flames of fire whenever he came near me. Was it madness? Was it witchery? I think it was a power of evil seizing upon the heated blood rather than on the mind or heart. It worked as a subtle poison, but though a poison, it was very sweet. In vain I struggled against it, yet I can hardly say that I struggled, for although I knew those feelings to be evil, I loved to dally with them, and the will to conquer was in abeyance. Being alone with him one day, he, carried away by passion, caught me in his arms. I offered no real resistance. I felt overtaken, and a sensation as of swooning seemed uppermost. Yet I must have made some involuntary movement of escaping from his hold, for the string of my necklace giving way suddenly, the pearls rolled hither and thither about the apartment. That brought me back to myself. He too seemed suddenly dispassioned. It was as though an invisible hand were attempting to part us. We started asunder. Yes, we had been sobered all at once, reality staring us in the face. I drew myself up, requesting his immediate departure, and he obeyed. I was anxious to look for my pearls, and happily I found them all, one only remaining lost, the blue one of wedded troth. Alas, how earnestly I sought for it, morning, noon, and night, but it had disappeared as by magic. I succeeded in keeping the fact from my husband for some time, and I permitted no foot save mine to enter the fatal room. I sought and sought, but the precious pearl was lost. And at last there was a day when my husband saw that it was gone. It was a terrible moment. He said little, but from that hour a gloom rested on his brow, which spoke more loudly than words could have done. I understood it. Thy troth is broken, thy purity lost. Thou art no more for me. The false friend also seemed stirred in conscience. He kept away. How it was with him I know not, but in me the fire had been kindled which burned with a hidden flame. My heart had conceived sin, and the wicked image would not be banished. I strove against it feebly. It was stronger than I. My inward gaze followed him spellbound, and with him was my every thought. Even in dreams I was his. That moment, when we had been so very near to actual deed of sin, had left its taint. Sin had gained an ascendancy over me, and I yielded helplessly in the secret chamber of my heart. And yet that heart had been pure before it knew him, and evil thoughts had never assailed it. Alas, how little is needed to murder innocence! The white robe of my soul was soiled. One only could have restored it to cleanliness, he who would not condemn the woman that was a sinner. But for him I looked not, groveling as I lay at the feet of an idol. I fell ill, and even in illness my folly was upon me, burning within. The wild fancies of fever must have laid bare my inmost soul to my husband. My last thoughts on earth clung to that sinful moment that robbed me of my pearl. I was the prey of death. Life vanished, and, lifting my eyes again, I found consciousness returning in the torment of hell. I have come to own the justice. There was a pause of silence, and then Emily continued. Do you know what it is to go back as a restless spirit to the upper world? No? Then you are a stranger happily to a cruel law ruling some of us here. I could not rest in hell. Go back I must to seek my pearl. I have been seeking these centuries past, but it is hopelessly lost. I cannot tell you what I felt on first returning, a disembodied soul, to my former home. I trembled as one on forbidden ground. Not a corner of the big old house I left unhaunted. In passages and rooms, from cellar to garret, I have been looking for my pearl, spreading terror everywhere. but the horror seems to recoil upon me, filling me with fear and trembling. Every inmate of that house, at one time or another, has seen the White Lady looking for something with a lamp. I am more dreaded than the nearness of death itself. One old servant only of the present household seems able to bear the sight of me. He has seen me so often that I believe he has got used to me. He folds his hands in silent prayer and heeds me not. It happens sometimes that we meet and meet again in the long dusty passages, he following his business, I bent on mine, with that difference between us, that he walks in confidence and I in despair. But it comforts my poor trembling heart to come upon his well-known figure in the lonely halls. I have known him from his youth upward, watched him doing his duty in uprightness of soul. His hair is white now and his figure stooping, but the nearer death he seems, the more courageous he looks, and the greater his fearlessness in meeting me. He alone appears to feel no horror at my approach, nor need he. I have as little power to harm him as he has to stop me. I can only look for my pearl. I hasten to the well-known chamber. This is the spot where for one fatal moment I yielded my soul to sin and was lost in consequence. Here it was that my jewel vanished. Here, then, I seek most anxiously with indescribable longing. But the pearl need not be here. Some one may have found it and taken it away. That is why I search the house, every chamber and every closet, peeping into my lady's jewel case and into the workbox of the humblest servant maid. It is chiefly among the women of the household that I look for the gem I lost. I flit through corridors. One of them, since time immemorial, has been used as a picture gallery. Here I find the lifelike image of the husband I so cruelly wronged. I dare not lift my eyes to it, yet I seem rooted to the ground there for hours. I keep thinking, might there not be an expression in his face, the shadow even of an expression, promising forgiveness and restoration? But I dare not look for it. I creep away, guilt trailing behind me. Guilt and shame, for my own picture hangs by the side of his, filling the measure of silent reproach. I fancy that picture to be my real self in youth and innocence, myself being but a miserable counterfeit. The pictures of my children, too, my lovely babes. My heart yearns for them who once found their heaven at my breast. But alas, they are strangers to me now. They look down upon me with eyes that know me not. Them also I betrayed, robbing them of their mother's love, and they need me not. I drop my eyes in bitter shame and hurry away. Some 7 generations I have seen come and go, the bonds of blood uniting us. But not only have they learned to look upon me as an intruding stranger, but to shun me as a very vision of hell. The venerable house has fallen into evil repute as being haunted. The family have often thought of leaving it or pulling it down, but somehow their fortunes seemed bound up with that ancient pile, and quitting becomes impossible. They accept the trouble of my presence, and I flit about, a lifeless shade among the living. The absence of a mystery, too, enables them to put up with me. I am known to be their ancestress, and my sad history, in all its details, is a matter of gossip. The very echoes of the house seem to whisper about the young wife who was so lovely but faithless. The fatal necklace is an heirloom in the family, but the central pearl is missing. A diamond cross has been added in its stead, a symbol of faith, if I remember aright. It is my necklace still, and whenever the owner for the time being is about to pass away, I appear by her dying bed with the solemn question, "Where is the pearl?" For several generations there was nothing but horror by way of an answer, and, dismayed at the terrible confusion I created, I would hurry away in despair. but an expedient has been found. The dying women now invariably place their hand on their Bible, replying boldly, "The pearl is found. We have this as a pledge." It is not my lost pearl, you understand, but there is no gainsaying their reply. Ah me! Had I found that pearl of great price, which gives such assurance to dying souls, I too might have had healing comfort for my loss. But the sin remains, my pearl is gone, and I am left to wail in torment. She was silent, writhing in agony. But even now, though filled with despair, her face preserved an expression of childlike loveliness and most engaging innocence. How bewitchingly beautiful she was! And I thought to myself, were it not that she stands condemned out of her own mouth, and had another told me her story, it would seem impossible to believe it, to credit so fair a creature with such a measure of indwelling wrong. Behold the growth of passion! It is but a passing thought, perchance, moving the heart. Whence is it, who can tell? Whence is the sudden cloud darkening the fair heaven? And whence the electric spark? Your mind conceives, and your heart, unless you guard it, will nurse the awful birth. The fiery influence shoots through your being. Your nerves tremble, your blood is aflame. And though quiet may be restored, there is that within you which at any moment may course through your veins afresh. For remember, if you had an ocean of the red stream of life, one drop of poison might vitiate it. Alas, it is more than a drop. The tempting thought has grown to a power of evil possessing you, a nature within your nature, wild, lawless, and leading you captive. Sin has taken root in your soul, innocent though it found you. How far it may take you, God alone can tell. Watch over your thoughts, then, lest they ruin your soul. Watch, I say, and stifle sin in its birth. It may be a small thing at first, but how awful is the growth, suffusing body and soul with poison doubly dangerous for its seeming sweetness. Has it seized your heart? Ah, fly to the physician. Where is he? Alas, my friend, I know not. End of letter 24.
Letter 25 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by L.W.J.S. Letter 25. Snatches of song keep running in my head. It is not I who seize upon melody, but the melody takes hold of me. You little think what power of torment there may be bound up in music, and the sweeter its echoes, the more cruelly they fall upon the soul. I do not refer to memories that may be connected with sound. They may be very bitter, but we are used to that and can hardly expect it to be otherwise. It is not this I mean. But there is that in music which is utterly discordant with this place of woe, producing a terrible jar in the soul. Harmony and hell, the bare thought is enough to distract you. What is music but a longing for the infinite, filling you with a foretaste of joy and beauty unspeakable? But for us the truth of such longing has vanished, since we are forever severed from that promised world, toward the shores of which the waves of highest melody will ever tend. Now only I understand the full power of music, but the knowledge is clothed with terrible pain, giving you a glimpse of paradise, and leaving you in hell. What was the name of that place among the hills of Samaria where we rested one noonday hour in the shadow of palm trees? Was it not Shechem or Sychar? The people there will tell you that a certain broken cistern, which still yields water, is the identical well where Jacob wept for joy on seeing Rachel with her father's sheep. Never have I known greener fields or more luxuriant vegetation than at this blessed spot, stern heights rising about you. The whole valley seemed a garden, rich in figs and mulberries, in pomegranates, vines and sycamores. The date palm, the cactus, the aloe grow in profusion, olive groves at the foot of the hills, pines and evergreen oaks climbing beyond. But there was no rest for us by Jacob's well. The heat was intense, even in the deepest shade, and the plague of insects was intolerable. We were glad, therefore, to shorten our siesta and seek the cooler upland air. On the road Lily told me a story. Let me repeat it. Two things, however, may surprise you with regard to this narrative, which treats of faith. A weak, wavering faith, it is true, but seeking for strength. You may wonder in the first place that Lily should have told it, whose pure, steadfast, childlike faith never knew the sorrows of tempting doubt. Of course, she may have read the story, but how she could give it with such vividness I cannot tell. You may be surprised, secondly, that I should repeat it, who am forever lost to the blessedness of believing. For had I but the poorest remnant left, this very fact, I doubt not, would bring me within the reach of salvation. It is memory only which has a hold of this little story, and though it stir my feelings, the spirit is dead, dead. Pity me, my friend, but you cannot understand the fearful mockery of speaking of things pertaining to faith, the very life of the soul, and having no part in them. They seem to rise before me, beckoning me to lay hold on them. I stretch forth my hand, and lo, there is a hopeless blank. It is just like trying to call back a face you have known. You see now the eyes, now the mouth, now this expression, now that, but the living whole will not return to you. Yea, and it is a face for which I thirst and hunger, even the face of him who died on the cross. I can speak now of this feature, now of that, of his wondrous love, his humility, his grace, but I cannot see him, the man of sorrows, who alone could yearn over a soul in hell. But enough. Whatever trouble weighed upon the spirit of him of whom Lily's story told, it must have been light and peace, compared with the fearful darkness enveloping me. This is what I remember. When the Apostle Peter took his last leave of the Christian people of Antioch, having set his face toward Rome to follow his Lord in death, a great number of the faithful, young and old, accompanied the beloved Father beyond the city. But they had to separate, weeping as he blessed them, and returning to their homes, they yielded their hearts to the will of God. The apostle went his way. But there was one, old in years, who, having shared in the parting benediction, yet followed in the distance, and Peter, perceiving him, beckoned him to approach. Thou art troubled, my son, said the aged apostle with winning love. What is it that oppresses thy heart? Father, replied the stranger timorously, is it not faith which justifies man in the sight of God, and makes him an heir of the kingdom? Yea, surely. Canst thou not believe? I do believe, beloved Father, but I cannot tell whether it is saving faith. It seems so weak and wavering, and yet by faith alone I may reach to heaven. That is my grief. I seem to be able to believe, fully and ardently at times, but not for long. And again I am left troubled and doubting. Faith seems to be shattered to pieces then, robbing me of all assurance. And were it not for the blessed name of the Saviour, I had nothing left to cling to. I have known moments when I seemed to rise as on wings of trust, when the fullness of heaven seemed given to me. And at such times I tasted all the blessedness of believing that he who seeks shall find, that he who knocks shall be received of God, of believing fully that I, led and taught by the Holy Spirit, would never again wander from my Father in heaven, that I was bought with a price, even the precious blood of Christ, and that his love would hold me safe to all eternity. I have known such faith as this, and, believe me, Father Peter, it was free from self-sufficient thoughts, and yet it cannot be saving faith. For at the very moment, sometimes, when my heart seemed nearest to the blessed communion of my Saviour, sin was at hand, and I fell grievously, losing the sense of divine acceptance, and finding myself in the dust, bleeding and helpless, and more miserable than he whom the thieves left lying on the road to Jericho. But the Good Samaritan was far, far away. Alas, Father, my sufferings at such times are great. The sneers of the unbelieving at the power of faith I could have borne. But that experience of my own heart should confirm such doubt distresses me greatly. Yet so far I have always risen to my feet again, to renew the conflict, shutting my doors on unbelief, and willing to be led as a child by him who came to save. But woe is me, I am not saved. I think I am standing, and lo, I fall. I am truly grieved at this my state, but repentance never yet gained me that power of the Spirit that might fit me for more real fellowship with Christ. Alas, Father Peter, my sorest weeping avails me not. When thou hadst fallen, thou didst weep, I know, but thou couldst rise from tears more firmly planted than before, never again to deny the blessed Lord. But not so I. I fall, I weep, I rise, I fall, denying the Master continually. You see, Holy Father, what manner of faith this is. There is but one thing I am sure of, even the name of the Saviour which alone has never left me. Aught else is wavering and, I doubt me, no certain foundation. Had I not been troubled already, I must have been filled with fear and trembling on hearing the word lately. Show thy faith by thy works, for alas my works, if not altogether evil, are full of imperfection testifying against my faith. How, then, shall it save me, if this is all my hope of acceptance? I look back on life, and lo, I see a continued struggle, now in sorrow, now in despair. I will not say I have lost hope entirely. Nay, I know that in spite of defeat I must go on battling, remembering that salvation is not of man's striving, but of God's giving. But I am old now, fast approaching the time when no man can work. Dare I hope for victory? Will it be given to such weakness of faith? I am full of fear, clinging to the one hope only, that the Good Samaritan, whose name I have believed in, for all my backslidings, will come to me at the last to lift me in his arms of pity and carry me home. But will he do it? He has bound up my wounds again and again. Will he accept me in the end? I dare not plead my faith, weak and wavering as it is. I am not altogether unworthy of his saving mercy. I have not loved him as I ought, even less than father or mother or son or daughter, coming continually between me and him. Ah, what shall I do to find his peace? What shall I do to be sure of being saved? The apostle had listened in silence. His countenance shone with a heavenly light, his eyes seeking for things afar. What was it that moved in his soul, radiating from his brow? What blessed memory of a day gone by? The Spirit had carried him back to the Sea of Tiberias, and he hears the voice of the risen Saviour. Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? And now, as then, his heart makes answer, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. And his Lord repeats, Feed my sheep. My sheep! He looked upon the aged man. Here was one of the good shepherd's wandering sheep, and greatly moved, the apostle said, My brother, if faith, being poor, cannot help thee, try love. Mark my words. Let it be thy one desire henceforth to show to the Lord that thou lovest him. Let nothing be too great, and nothing too little, to do for his sake. Let love to him be thy staff and thy strength, and thou shalt find peace for thy soul. Thy very endeavor to prove thy love to him will make thee rich in the assurance of his love. It will fill thy soul. It will save thee utterly. Love for thee also will be the law's fulfillment. Behold, he added, how wondrous is his love, steeping thee in blessing even while thou art sacrificing all. Whatever thou doest for him comes back to thee. He never takes, he only gives, fulfilling his own word that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Yet it is thy love he looks for. But what of faith, my father? Asked the stranger doubtingly, by which alone we are said to live. A happy smile lit up the apostle's countenance, and he replied, It will be well, my son, with faith even. Thinkest thou it could be absent where love lives and moves? Go thy way, and hold fast that which thou hast, and grace and peace be with thee evermore. Have I not spoken some time ago of a peculiar pain, a separate sorrow? Ah, my friend, I have not told thee all. We are ever on the verge of despair, a touch, a thought only. And we are in the midst of it. It is incessantly welling up from the depth of our own heart, ready to engulf us. The mind at times resists with a frenzied power, but only to sink back in defeat. And the worst of it is that I am struggling as it were on both sides, offering agonized resistance, while turning tooth and nail against myself in maddest hatred. How long these fits may last I cannot tell. It is not with us as with you, that exhausted nature herself yields the remedy. There is no nature here, but only existence. But the paroxysm ceases. There seems to be a climax of fury. When I have beaten myself out, so to speak, there is a lull. But sometimes, this is the deepest experience, would I could say the most precious. But that is more than hell admits of. Sometimes, as the waves of madness sink away, there rises a vision to my soul, wondrous and holy, even the image of the crucified one. And there is a sudden calm. Despair seems drowned, and all is still. Not that suffering ceases, but an all-enfolding sense of loss has swallowed up the rest. I stand accused. I hear a voice crying, It is thou, thou who broughtst him to the cursed tree. Did I say vision? Nay, the very word is too much. I was a prey to longing, but I dare not delude myself. Such seeing is not for me. The hungry spirit imagined for a moment. I see the cross, the thorn-crowned figure. I look, and it is gone. Yet I seem to feel it present, if only I could pierce the hiding darkness. I gaze and gaze, but tenfold night enwraps the longing soul. Him who died I see not, but the cross keeps dawning forth and receding. Beyond it I get not. I once knew the story, but it is gone, gone, and the more I try to remember, the greater seems the blank. Tell me, ought I to despair? Ought I to rejoice? I see a cross truly, though an empty one. Did he not die on the cross? Why should it keep rising before me? Is it for punishment? Is it for hope? Was not there something about taking up the cross and following? Happy, Thrice happy, O men and women, having a cross to bear. Murmur not, but bear it willingly, lest the time come when ye long for it, and find it in an empty vision, the very burden gone. End of Letter 25.
Letter 26 from Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Letter 26. We were sitting together on a high cliff overlooking a northern sea. A few solitary trees stretched forth their branches above us, a landmark for vessels sailing by. Far below us the murmuring waves broke in melodies cadence, leaving their mysterious message with the lonely shore. Evening was stealing across the sky with those lingering touches known only in the distant north, night hesitating, though the sun be about to set. Sleeping nature there is curtained in a balmy twilight, steeped in the tints of vanished sunbeams, and hiding with tender shadows both land and sea. In the north, only summertime reaches its fullest meaning, each sinking day leading forth the radiant morn. Darkness is not, but a dreamful dusk in its stead. Nothing more beautiful than those evening hours, with their slowly settling calm. How enchanting the stillness! How full of poetry the hushed expanse, the slumberous sea at your feet, and the distant shore blushing with the kisses of parting day. But I was heedless of it all, for she sat by me. Her deft little hands were busy with some needlework. I was to read to her, but the book had dropped from my hold, and I was fast losing myself in dreams. How sweet she was in her springtime of youth, just entering upon her 16th year. There was something unutterably attractive in that first unfolding of womanhood, so tenderly appealing, so holy withal. She was very white, but it was the transparent whiteness of the lily it suffused with a faint reflection of the sunset sky. The red life stream of youth, fragrant and pure, throbbed beneath her delicate skin. It took but little to call up bewitching blushes to her lovely face. A wealth of hair crowned her in fell and silky masses about her shoulders, and her long lashes appeared to withhold a depth of beauty from your longing gaze. There was something indefinitely childlike about her mouth and the sweet oval of her face, but it blended with an impress of womanhood, a mystery to be worshipped. A peculiar stillness veiled her being, a calm of life, if so I may call it. The gentle breathing moved her bosom, and her hands flitted lightly about her work. She was busy with her own thoughts, which seemed to glide across her features like sunbeams, leaving a smile behind. But as I sat wrapped in the sight of her, the good angel watching me turned and wept. The evil spirit was fast gaining the upper hand. But even at such moments the pure soul of hers had powers to subdue. Unconscious of aught else, no movement in her escaped me. I soon perceived glow chasing glow on her cheek, and mantling her brow, her hands trembled. Signs of warning these, if I could have called back the better self. At last her eye met mine with a good look of gentle reproof, steeped in dignity. The spell was broken. A feeling of contrition swept my senses. The good angel was ready to lift me above the mire of the earth-born passion. "Will you keep looking at me so persistently?" she said. "Why, Lily, what could I say? Do you dislike it?" "I am sorry to seem unkind, Philip," she said, "but I do dislike it. If you stare at me like that, I feel strangely troubled, like a bird held fast by cruel hands. I do not know why, but you might as well look elsewhere. Could you not, dear?" "Certainly," I said, smiling at the simple question. "But do you think I could harm you?" Are you afraid of me?" "Afraid of you?" she cried, roused to sprightliness. "That is strange. I might as well ask whether you are afraid of me. Are you?" And she put her little hand in mine. "Are you angry?" she went on gently, after a while. Yes, I was, but not with her. I hated myself, but answered quietly enough. "When I was angry with you last, Lily, let me see. I don't remember it in the least," she said, brightening more and more. "But now we had better think of home now." And she took my arm, looking at me with her trustful eyes, as if to say that fear of me was altogether impossible. But she did not even think it. I only laid hold of the thought and felt happy again. We went along the cliff. It was a rich, balmy evening in June. On the strand below, the fishing boats offered a busy scene. A few yachts in the distance glided before the breeze. And on the horizon an island coast lay shrouded in mystery of transfiguring light. It was one of those rare evenings when earth's beauty seems touched with a reflection of heaven's perfect bliss. "Afraid of you," Lily repeated, reverting gaily to the thread we had dropped. "That was the strangest idea you ever had. On the contrary, I feel wonderfully secure and taken care of, and the thought of your manliness fills me with pride. I fancy sometimes that strength is given to you for me as well, that you would never allow anyone to hurt me, and I say to myself, who could resist him? It must be a grand thing to be a man and do noble things in life, but I think it is better still to be a woman and be cared for by a man who is noble and strong. And you know things much better than I do. They say there is much evil in the world. It is sad, but I suppose it is true. Now a man with your knowledge sees things and sees through them. He must be comparatively safe from evil and be able to hold others safe. That is why I feel so happy by your side, as though I could follow blindly wherever you lead me. I care not to be strong and clever myself, since I have all I need in you. You are noble, I am sure, and ready not only to defend those you love, but even to give up everything for their sake. I like to fancy myself in trouble and danger. It is quite a pleasant sensation, so long as I have you near me. I am sure you would even risk your life for me, would you not? You smile, but don't think me silly. I am quite sure you are good and noble and strong." Of course I smiled. My soul seemed lit up as with 1,000 stars, dispelling everything that need shun the light. What a wondrous power that child had over me, lifting me above myself into her own atmosphere of purity. I may well call it an influence divine. I seemed to rise from the dust and to be what she believed me, one stronger than she, good and wise, well fitted to be the guardian of her trustful life. Oh, happy moment, never to return! The evening was fading. We were not far from our dwelling. We had reached a place where we often rested, on the top of a towering cliff, rising several hundred feet above the sea. At high water the waves would beat about the foot of it, foaming and curling and falling back exhausted. But the tide was low now, and the slippery ripples in the distance hardly touched the ear. On the top of the cliff a flagstaff had been erected, something in the shape of a cross. Beneath it there was a low wooden bench. We sat down, Lily and I, as we had often done before. The top of the cliff was still within reach of the parting light. All about us, land, sea, and sky, seemed veiled and calm. We sat silent. A sacred stillness, the peace of nature at rest, enfolded our hearts. "Look!" cried Lily suddenly, pointing upward. "A flight of sea birds winging their way across the deep, high above us, but it was so still that we heard them plainly. We followed them with our eyes till they vanished in the dusk." "They are gone," said Lily, with a deep drawn sigh. "Were they not like blessed souls journeying to the better land, where sorrow is not, nor death, nor pain, and tears are wiped away? How they must rejoice! What longing! What triumph!" Strange to say, a similar idea had come to me. My soul was open to uplifting thoughts. The silence was broken, and presently we talked about the music of the sea. the monotonous rhythm of which seems ever new. I compared the rising and sinking of the waters to a pendulum measuring the ages of eternity, and we spoke of the wondrous longing in the human heart, ever reaching to that which is afar, above, beyond, making it restless even in the lap of content. Again we were silent, and then Lily said, "How beautiful that the sign of the cross should overlook the sea from this high cliff! How the sight of it must flash comfort across the deep, cheering the sailor in time of trouble, perhaps when he is battling against wind and wave. The white cliff will be seen afar, and the cross must seem to stretch forth arms of blessing, sending the message far and wide. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee, thou art mine." But Lily, not everybody shares your feeling. This cross, as you call it, to most sailors, will be a mere flagstaff. "Perhaps so," she said, "but Christian people are alike in deepest feeling nevertheless." She paused and then continued, closing her hands on my arm unconsciously. "For my own part, I have often felt the power of the cross, young as I am. I love to think of it as a symbol. Sometimes when I am troubled, I need but call the thought of it to mind, and quiet is restored. It seems marvelous, but it is natural after all, for we do not know that love for us brought him to the cross. Can your heart even be troubled, Lily?" "Yes, often. It is true I have everything to make me happy, but unrest often fills my soul. I suppose it must be so while we are in this life." She was right. The heart of man will be battling for deepest rest to the last. "But I have what is better than the cross to help me," Lily continued, rising and leaning against it. "His own dear name. Whatever trouble may come to me, I need but whisper that name, and peace straightway flows down upon me. His own peace, so full of healing. Surely it is blessed to call on him in all things. Have you tried it, Philip? Oh, do! It is so easy to turn to him with all our griefs and failings. It needs but a word, a clinging to his name, and the blessing is given. I know it. I have found it so. No, I could not say I had tried, at least never since I was wont to pray by Aunt Betty's knee. But what was that moving within, stirring my deepest soul? Yes, I would listen, I would follow and try. The Good Shepherd standing at the door. It was not his fault that salvation was offered in vain. I heard him knocking, even then, and his fear fell upon me. "Is it thou, Lord?" I cried, tremblingly. "Alas, I am not ready. I will let thee in when the place is prepared." And feebly I set about sweeping and garnishing it, keeping him waiting till it was too late. End of letter 26. Read by Elijah Fisher.
Letter 27 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 27. My letters are becoming few and far between. I dread the effort more and more, though I feel urged to write. I yield, but only to be seized with an indescribable reluctance, and I drop the pen in the midst of a sentence perhaps. This reminds me of Aunt Betty's letters, luckily. That will help me to catch a thread, for I assure you the very sight of ink is sickening to me. But the memory of Aunt Betty is like a refreshing breeze. Now, Aunt Betty's letters were a very image of herself, bubbling over, candid, and sometimes queer, without the faintest pretense at elaboration. She had no time for thought or composition, she said, and she wrote none but so-called confidential letters. But the fact was that her missives sometimes would produce the strangest confusion. I remember her coming flying into my mother's room one day with a letter in her hand. "She must be stark, staring mad," she cried excitedly. "What am I to do with Jemima's paupers? Was there ever such a misunderstanding?" We tried to calm her, and begged her for an explanation. I was a half-grown lad at the time. Auntie plunged into the subject. There was a poor sick woman with a handful of children whom I assisted in supporting, while the husband served his term for housebreaking. Now, Jemima wrote to me the other day that the convict had returned, that the wife had died, leaving him as helpless as any of his babes. Would I suggest what could be done? I did the nearest thing at hand, dispatching some money and begging her to send particulars as to age, sex, and the rest of it. I would try and find homes for them. The sex of the husband, Auntie? I interposed roguishly. Don't interrupt me with your nonsense, Philip. It is too much of a mess, and I am sure a great trouble to dispose of. Can you imagine that stupid Jemima sending me the whole lot of them bodily? There they are in the housekeeper's room, 8 blessed souls, imagining I have homes for them in my pocket. That hulking convict. Above all things smelling horribly of tobacco. What am I to do? Perhaps you meant to write for particulars, and wrote for the family instead, I suggested. How can you be so stupid, Philip? I am sure my letters are as plain as ink. No child could mistake their meaning. Jemima must have lost her head. The convict and his offspring, meanwhile, were solacing themselves in the housekeeper's room, overflowing with thanks. And nothing seemed further from their minds than the idea of ever leaving again. Aunt Betty meantime running to and fro, asking distractedly, what should she do with them? However, she found my father coming to the rescue, and the misunderstanding proved prolific of blessing, inasmuch as the former housebreaker was before long started in a course of honesty, and his flock of children cared for. You have followed me so far, and I have told you that evil desires, vainly seeking to be gratified, are an ever-burning fire here. But to what extent this is true you can scarcely conceive, not knowing how they are inflamed. It is imagination, of course, to which that horrible office pertains. Even on earth, imagination may gain a dangerous ascendancy, but in hell it wields a terrible sway. It becomes a monster of tyranny here, the soul being its helpless prey. Nothing more easy, after all, than to clothe gloating fancy with a certain amount of reality. Bring the conscious will to bear, and you have your desire, after a fashion, the table to glut at, the wine, the dice, the handsome woman you covet. Hell is full of such things, but all is worse than illusion. Oh, let me be silent. It is adding mockery to torture. You understand me, I think. The crime of Ixion and the fiery wheel of his agony form together a true symbol of the condition of multitudes of the lost. Can you doubt that I am referring to my own experience? Have I not told you that I was a man of sensual bent and a slave to passion? Do you imagine that either is mortified here? Ah, let me refrain. I am no better than others here, except, perhaps, that at times I am overwhelmed with shame. How is it possible for one who loved Lily, who was loved by her, to sink so low? Yet there is one difference marking me out from at least some others. I have a sure means of recovering myself from the tyranny alluded to, imagination itself being the means to that end. Whenever the pure, exalted image of Lily rises on my soul, all evil passions are assuaged, the wild conflagration ceases, and once again I seem a human soul. I am so tired, Philip, she said softly, and forthwith I stopped the mule that carried her. As a tender mother her ailing child, I lifted her from the saddle, depositing her gently on the mossy ground. We were near a bridge leading over Brook Cedron. So tired. Oh, the sad, sad story contained in these words. But 17, and always tired, I had closed my heart to the painful testimony. I would not believe that so young a life might be taken, yet I could not drive anxiety away entirely. Again and again I was forced to face the dread reality. Life will probably ebb away in hemorrhage. An English physician at Jaffa had said, "Be very careful. Any exertion or emotional excitement may bring it on." And I was careful, keeping her as the apple of my eye. That journey through the Holy Land, undertaken at her own urgent entreaty, was but one continuous attempt to make her happy. She was the center of a circle of love into which nothing harmful was allowed to enter. That I served her was natural, but Turks and Bedouins even looked upon her with worshipping awe. Ah, deathless time, love and pain abounding! Wherever we went, she found holy memories of him to whom her heart had been given. He speaking to her through the Bible she loved. Nay, it was he that accompanied her from place to place. Her happiness was supreme. "I seem to be in heaven already," she would say to me. To her the sun was rising and setting as in a dream, transfiguring all earthly things. The fleeting hours to her were as moments anticipating eternity. It came, the dreaded spectre, like a thunderbolt from a cloudless sky, not carrying her off, but leaving me hopeless with fear. She recovered a little, but what prospect was there of returning health? Her mind was easy, but anxiety with me was great. As a drooping lily she was fair still and fragrant, holding her cup prayerfully while she was able, but fast closing her petals in the faintness of death. Lily is tired. The heavenly gardener was transplanting her to his paradise above. We were halting by the royal brook, Lily remembering David and a greater king that passed there. The scenery is present with me even now, every stone, every shrub of that hallowed spot. Moriah was in view, where Solomon's temple once stood, and that other temple built by Herod, where Omar's mosque now lifts her minarets proudly. To our right lay the valley of Jehoshaphat, deep and narrow, a cleft between towering mountains, the rocks on the one side being fretted with innumerable caves, the sepulchres of old, of kings and prophets. On the mount of corruption to our left, a poverty-stricken Jewish village clings to the steep incline. At our feet was the stony bed of Cedron, panting for its dried-up waters. The mound of olives was rising beyond, a succession of gentle curves. Leading onward to Gethsemane, a group of ancient olive trees marks that sacred spot. The setting sun was casting deep shadows, broken by streaks of dazzling light, across the valley, the top of Olivet only glowing with a subdued radiance that was grateful to the eye. The place where we rested was in the shade entirely. A gentle breeze, but cool and refreshing, was playing about us. Lily sat still with folded hands, looking listless. She was tired to death perhaps. Her eyes closed. Oh, how white she looked, and pure as a dying Madonna. But more alarming than her pallor were those sudden flushes overspreading her features, leaving her more white than before. The mule and his attendant had composed themselves to sleep at a little distance. "Happy boy," I said, looking at him, adding involuntarily, "Happy animal." The Turkish escort engaged for our safety lay smoking the inevitable hookah, in blissful ignorance apparently of landscape beauty or human grief. Silence was becoming oppressive. My Lily was not asleep, though her eyes were closed, and I turned to her gently with a question. "What are you thinking of?" "My sins," she said, looking at me. "Your sins?" I echoed, refraining from what I was going to add, lest I should pain her. "Oh, Lily, my pious child, they can neither be grievous nor many." "Yes, Philip," she said eagerly. "There is no one good save He. We have all come short of the glory, but God only knows how much we have sinned." "But what makes you think of sin just now?" She looked up, surprised. The gift was hers at any time to open my eyes. I knew what she meant. My gaze went abroad over the peaceful expanse. Truly, what spot could be more fitted to convince man of his own worthlessness? I bowed my head in shame. Dear friend, she continued, tremulous with emotion, at this very moment I feel reproved. Even here wrong thoughts will assail the heart. A sudden longing had come to me that I might be spared a little longer. But I forgot to add, Thy will be done. You see that was wrong, for we ought to yield ourselves to Him entirely, believing that our Father knows best, else we cannot be His children. An indescribably bitter feeling of anger and self-will rose in my heart. What knew I of giving up the will for the gain of sonship? My eye involuntarily sought the Mussulman, and the evil spirit said, Better be a Turk outright. But chastening sorrow was at hand, and I said gently, Surely you may live. Do not sadden your heart with such thoughts. O Lily, my good little sister, my own, think of the love that would keep you here. I do, she said, with a smile like sunbeams breaking through clouds. Love here is precious, but a better love awaits me beyond. Another pause, but I would not, I could not be silent, and I continued. The desire to live cannot be wrong, sweetest Lily. Let it be very present with you, and you will see it fulfilled. God Himself has planted the love of life in our hearts. It cannot be sinful, then, to cling to it. Do not wrong yourself. There never was a less self-willed being than you, so unselfish and good. So the brother's love would think, she said, looking at me tenderly. But you are right in this. My feelings were not selfish though self-willed. It is not for my own sake I would wish to live. I was thinking of others. Philip, darling, can you understand that I would like to live for your sake? I know you will miss me more than any, you, my one, my truest friend. Had I been alone with her, I would have sunk at her feet in a transport of worship. As it was, I could but stammer, Lily, I shall die if you leave me. Again we spoke not, but silence now was sweetened. I had seen heaven opened. Her face was veiled in solemn seriousness. I knew she was battling it out in her soul. But even the trouble of conflict could not cloud her trust in God. She saw the palm of victory. Reaching forth her hand to seize it, for I heard her murmur, Thy will, Lord, not mine. Yet the crown was not fully hers at that moment, it seemed. She rose suddenly, saying with quivering lips, It must be sin which prevents the full gift of peace. Surely it is wrong to cling to life, but I am ready to go, and I feel stronger now. Let us move on. I took hold of her hand with a gentle pressure, saying, I know not how I could frame such words. Lily, my own, it is not the world you feel bound to, and surely such love as yours is far from sin. How can you feel guilty and troubled? She looked at me, with a heavenly light gleaming in her eyes. I felt it at the time, but understood not such beauty, not knowing the victory it promised. I do feel sinful, but not troubled, she said, for I can trust Him, and He knows it. Look, Philip, she continued, turning to the dried-up brook. Can you count these pebbles, great and small? Innumerable as they are the sins of the world, but the foot of Him has passed here when He sorrowed even unto death. The sins of all were laid upon Him, mine too. He has taken them away. They cannot trouble me. We went beyond Cedron, ascending Olivet, and reaching Gethsemane. The garden is enclosed with a low stone wall, and contains 8 olive trees of great antiquity. The spot where Judas betrayed his Lord with a kiss is fenced in separately, and even the Turks deem it accursed. We stopped beneath those trees, the same, no doubt, which saw the Saviour wrestle in awful agony, when He drank the cup that men might go free. Lily was kneeling in earnest devotion, praying for submission, and, I doubt not, praying for me. Peace was given her there and then, shining like a halo from her brow as she rose. Thy will be done! But my soul was barren of prayer. I felt ready to curse my weakness which had agreed to this pilgrimage through the Holy Land. I longed for our far-off home. Life there, I imagined, might have smiled upon us, whereas death stared me in the face at every turn on the sacred soil. We took the shorter way back, passing St. Stephen's Gate, and following the Via Dolorosa through the town. That road is full of holiest reminiscences, the praetorium where the crown of thorns was platted and the Holy One mocked by sinful men, the Ecce Homo arch, where Pilate pointed to the Saviour saying, "Behold the man," the spot where Mary, meeting her divine Son as he carried the cross, fainted for grief, and that other spot where the Lord, turning to the wailing women that followed him, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." And lastly, the place where the saintly Veronica wiped his holy forehead with her veil. Here we turned aside, but the road leads on to Calvary. This then was the Via Dolorosa, a road of sorrows for me as well, but not of him I thought who once went this way as the lamb to be slain. I grieved for myself only, and not a thought of comfort I found on that road. How then should I be comforted here? It seems strange that I never thought of visiting the so-called city of the Jews, which is one of the greatest sights in hell. It is not spoken of as Jerusalem here, but I doubt not it is the actual city which bore that name on earth. At any rate, I can never think of it without straightway calling to mind the city I knew. A burning desire laid hold of me suddenly to go to Jerusalem. What though it was a town of sorrows to me? I had Lily there. It seems in my power once again to see the places I visited with her, to traverse the narrow valley of Jehoshaphat, to rest by the bridge leading over Cedron, to follow the road of sorrows from Gabbatha to Golgotha, and, if so minded, to lay me down by the way at the rich man's gate, another Lazarus. And yet if that city be Jerusalem in truth, it must be a city ruined and undone. There must be a great difference between Jerusalem of old and Jerusalem after its fall. But what is that to me? Whatever the city may have come to here, it cannot be so utterly changed that I shall not recognize the places I once saw with Lily by my side. I cannot rest, and though light be fast decreasing, I am urged to go. What though it be but vain imaginings which drive me thither, there is a miserable satisfaction in obeying the behest. But let me make inquiries first concerning that strangest of cities. Far away though it be, surely there are people here who can tell me something about it. End of Letter 27.
Letter 28 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Rick Vina. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 28. Far away and separated from the continent of hell by an immeasurable waste lies the great city of the Jews, a world apart. And there, in perpetual cycles, the dread history repeats itself, from the catastrophe of Golgotha to the final destruction. Upon the sacking of Jerusalem, the whole is engulfed in darkness. But daylight reappearing, the wheel of history has run back, once more to begin the awful period. Any one entering the city as the night is dispelled finds the Jewish people overwhelmed with horror at the recent deed. The awful words keep sounding about them. His blood be on us and on our children. They seem aware that a terrible thing has been done, that a terrible retribution is at hand. Jerusalem trembles. Those who have taken part in bringing about that most fearful of crimes ever perpetrated by man, but whose consciences are not seared entirely, raise the question whether, after all, he was the Son of God whom they crucified. They smite upon their breast and rend their garments. Even the chief priests and elders, hardened though they be, are disturbed, but they flatter themselves with the consolation that the sepulchre is made sure. As the great Sabbath breaks, behold them going forth to the garden with Caiaphas at their head. Pale are their faces, and bloodshot their eyes. They grind their teeth, but Satan upholds them. The 3 crosses from Golgotha look down upon them, but not one of those men dares lift an eye to the place where they hanged him on the tree. Where is their priestly dignity? See how they snatch up their long clothing and hasten apace to the tomb. Having reached it, they seem satisfied. It is all as it should be. The watch is there, the seal untouched, and the stone in its place. The great Sabbath has come, but never was there less of Sabbath joy in Jerusalem. A cloud is upon the people. They all wish the festal time were past. Their thoughts roam away from symbolic action. The unleavened bread has lost its sweetness. The blood of the paschal lamb is clotted in their hands as they endeavor to put it upon the lintel of their houses. The angel of death does not pass by. He is among them. They know it in their hearts. But see, they shake off the stupor. As a stroke of lightning, the news has fallen upon them that the crucified one has risen. The words of life sound as a death knell in their ears. But is it true? Corroborative evidence is loud on all sides. There is no gainsaying the wondrous event. They hasten towards the sepulchre. It is empty, and the stone rolled from the door. Pilate is one of the very first to whom the news is taken. His evil conscience has told him to expect the worst, and lo, the worst has happened. There is a God to raise the righteous, even from the grave, and to destroy the workers of iniquity. Pilate trembles at every sound. Each moment, he thinks, must bring the avenger to his door. He looks for his wife, the abject coward, and hears her cry, "My dream, oh, my dream! Alas, that thou deliveredst this just one into their hands." But the high priests and elders are not so easily daunted. They quickly spread the tale that the body of the Nazarene had been stolen away by his disciples, who invented, they said, the story of his resurrection. They bribed the watchmen to accuse themselves before Pilate of having slept at their post, and the cowardly governor is glad to accept the lie, thrusting the unhappy men into prison to ease his mind. But the marvelous account is not so easily suppressed. Again and again it is said, "The Son of Man is risen indeed, and has been seen by many." And the chief priests know not how to help themselves. The high council forbids the very mention of him who was crucified. By degrees the terror lessens. Life in the city runs its wonted course. Like startled sheep, the people follow their accustomed leaders, and these fail not to apply the balm of self-righteousness to every wound. Hypocrisy flourishes, yielding the fruits of death. The whited sepulchres spread the corruption hidden within, and soon the whole body of the people has sickened with uncleanness. It is fast becoming a dead carcass, and the eagles, the worms, will have it for their prey. Pilate has disappeared. There have been other governors after him, more capable of ruling than he, and the people find it out to their hurt. They are a butt to cruelty and derision, till they can no longer bear it. The flames of insurrection shoot aloft, the heated passions breaking loose. But Jerusalem's worst enemy is within her own walls, the fury of discord. Wildly the people rave against each other. No crime so hideous but it is committed against very brothers. Jerusalem's last hour is at hand. The enemy storms her walls, breathing vengeance and destruction. The end has come of trouble as of hatred, an awful end. The horrors of that siege have never been equaled. A night of death envelops the scene. The history is played out, to begin again with each recurring dawn. The day was far advanced when I entered the city. The final catastrophe was at hand. The enmity within had reached its height. Hopeless discord was rampant. Hypocrisy and hatred against the common enemy without were the only bonds uniting the seething mass. Deceit, treachery, unchaste living, perjury, murder, and all manner of sorcery showed their unblushing front. And yet, to outward appearance, it continued the proud city of David. Gloriously as ever, the holy hill of Zion lifted her battlements, and on Moriah rose the temple in splendor unsurpassed. Piety in long garments stood about the streets, making prayers for a pretense. Crowds of people passed to and fro from the synagogues. Devoutness, in fact, made itself conspicuous everywhere. Among the pious inscriptions adorning the dwellings, by way of proving the peculiar sanctity of their inhabitants, I was struck with one especially, which occurred far oftener than any other, so that I needs must take it as significant. Godliness is gain. It seemed indeed as if the people were running after both these jointly, looking upon godliness as a means, upon gain as the coveted result, and deeming no cunning too great to obtain it. My heart quaked as I stole through the crowded streets. This, then, was Jerusalem. Oh, how different from the city I had known, and yet how like. It was the same old Jerusalem of the time when the Saviour went about in it, teaching and healing. The Saviour, aye. At every step the thought of him rose to my mind, to the forgetting even of Lily. Here, surely, there must be men who can tell of him. But first of all I would follow that road from Gabbatha to Golgotha, alas, with other feelings than might have been possible on earth. I needed a guide, and stopped the first Jew I met on the way. But he broke from me gruffly with a sneer. So did another, and yet another. And presently I was buffeted on even mentioning the Via Dolorosa. I suppose they took it for Latin, and believed me to be a Roman. At first I saw in their rudeness merely their probable dislike to me as a stranger. Before long, however, I could not but accept the fact that in all that city no one could be found who had any knowledge concerning the Son of Mary. He was forgotten, forgotten entirely. False prophets had risen in his stead, to whom they had listened. There was nothing left for me but to try and find the way unaided. I turned away in the direction of Brook Cedron, finding the very place by the bridge where once I rested with Lily. On that spot I would rest me now. Alas, rest I could not. I only stopped. There I sat, silent and alone, but content was far away. Memories of Lily were neither more vivid nor more real. Longing only was increased tenfold. I had been anxious to revisit the holy scenes, and found them fraught with disappointment. That since existence to me was one great disillusion, what mattered it? Jerusalem was but a grave, forsaken of the Spirit, estranged from God, a prey to hatred, a dead body given over to the undying worm. The souls peopling it were the ghosts of an awful past, living in the destruction they had called down. What could I have found there to yield me even a shadow of content? I had come thither to find myself in a like damnation. Fool that I was to expect it otherwise. But we never learn by experience. We did not on earth. We cannot in hell. Faint at heart, I grovelled my way back to the city, and came upon scenes of excitement. A new governor had arrived, the last but one appointed by Rome, and was making a splendid entry. I was anxious to see something of one of the most remarkable cities in hell, the city of politicians, called also the town of injustice. Thither I moved. On the road I met the strangest procession, a most extraordinary machine, being wheeled along by a rabble conspicuous for scarlet caps, and howling frightfully. On the top of the structure I beheld, sitting as on a throne, a man wearing the most elegant apparel of Paris fashion and last century style. The hair slightly powdered and carefully arranged, the necktie scrupulously white and embroidered. the velvet coat, both costly and genteel, the cuffs of lace, setting off hands delicately shaped like a woman's, the silken hose, the shoes trim with bow and buckle. Would one not take such outward signs as the index of a disposition fastidiously refined? But no, he is satiated with blood, worse than Nero himself, his triumphal car on the present occasion being an ambulant guillotine. Have you recognized him? Still thirsting for blood, this graceful image of gentility, but hell yields nothing for the quenching of thirst, not even blood. He is always looking at people's necks, as shown by his very compliments, such as they are. "Sir," he says, "your neck is very fine. Madam, allow me to congratulate you upon a lovely throat." Followed by his creatures, a very hangman's company, he likes to ride abroad among the people, upon whom he looks as a kind of raw material for his philanthropic experiments. But the common folk make faces at him, calling him a fool possessed of a harmless mania. No one is afraid of him now, for power over necks is not given him here. The unsatisfied craving is his punishment also. Still, he has a circle of friends and followers who share his notions with regard to the general rottenness of society and the need of sanguinary revolution. They are sorry for his disappointment, and whenever he has fixed upon a place for his beloved guillotine, they very kindly offer him their necks for decapitation. The procedure, mind you, being without hurt or harm to themselves, the sort of thing which used to be done in Astley's theatre. But their good-natured make-believe cannot satisfy him, simply because there is no shedding of blood. It was a long journey I had undertaken, and I passed by a town looking a very necropolis. Dark and mute it rose upon a dismal flat. No window, no door showed life within. Not a sound was heard, and though gates stood open, not a soul came forth. Once, twice I walked around, not a living creature in sight. I kept wondering, till a stray ghost explained to me the strange appearance. It was the town of the Inquisition, he said, adding that not long since a powerful king of Spain, with unheard-of splendor and a great retinue, had made his entry into that town. Shall I or shall I not? I came to the conclusion that where his Catholic Majesty had gone, I might venture. But at the gate I came upon a placard sufficiently startling. Thus it ran, quote, "Auto da fe of peculiar interest. Whereas His Most Catholic Majesty, the powerful protector of the Holy Inquisition, has graciously promised to be burnt alive, after most royal and exquisite torture, and whereas 600 heretics will wait on His Majesty at the stake, the sublime spectacle of their witnessing his passing to the nether fire is herewith announced, the setting in scene being strictly in keeping with hell." End quote. A strange announcement, to be sure, but no doubt he had come to his own place, that much lamented King of Spain, and the town was even now preparing to greet him right royally. Should I indeed go in? I hesitated. Still, I doubted not that even the worst in that city might be borne, and on the other hand, that placard exercised a kind of demoniac influence over my imagination. I must see that sight. This, then, was the second holy city I had the honor of visiting, and in truth there is a peculiar likeness between them. What the city of destruction is to the Jewish people, the town of the Inquisition may be said to be to Christendom. A shudder went through me as I entered. Automatically the gates swung on their hinges, closing with an ominous shriek. Those gates, strange to say, stand open like a yawning grave to him who approaches, falling to behind him who has gone in. There I was, in the town of crooked streets and death-breathing atmosphere. The high houses have the fewest of windows, and those are provided with iron bars, prison-like. Horror seemed to dwell within. Mysterious figures went gliding through the gloomy thoroughfares, wrapped in long cowls and hoods over their heads, with two round staring holes for the eyes. Are they dead men risen from their graves? And here and there a procession meets me, either of dismal penitents, offering the most horrible examples of fanatical self-torture, or of thanksgiving, more dismal still, accompanying condemned sufferers to the scene of their public agony. Pomp and vanity here also, forsooth. But the only thing which brings life into the stagnation of that city is an auto da fe. The inhabitants, one and all, are people who at one time or another were servants of the Inquisition. Others may enter if they are so minded. I myself being one of the few foolhardy who did so. This city of the Inquisition is as a grave enclosing a terrible secret, for no one knows who, in accordance with the verdict of an unknown tribunal, shall be the next to be dragged to most horrible torture. No one is safe, not even those who hold high position in the mysterious community. Possibly the most zealous votaries of a fanatical church. The very members of the secret tribunal are not safe, for he who lately sentenced his neighbor to cruel and exquisite torture may be the very one to suffer next. Their fate lays hold of them secretly and swiftly. Fate? Nay, but a just retribution. They are dragged from their hiding places and brought to the bar. They shall give an account of their faith. They are utterly unable. no one can do so in hell. They are judged accordingly. But, be it noticed, their very judges are equally unable to confess their faith. And now for torture. Whatever of horror, of cruelty, has been invented on behalf of the Inquisition is all known here, and applied to the fullest extent. The victims are disembodied spirits, true, but their imagination is keenly alive to the torment. On earth they raved against hapless humanity. Now they rave against one another, each being judge and victim in turn. They wind up with the stake. But although the fire has no flame, and although the miserable wretches are unable to burn, they none the less suffer in the spirit the excruciating agony of dying on a slowly consuming pyre. The end of all is horror unspeakable. Souls do not live here. They tremble and quake. Even I shared in the common sensation, although I tried to console myself that in such respect, at any rate, I was guiltless, having never joined, directly or indirectly, in religious persecution. But no matter. Since I was there, I seemed in a like damnation. How frightful was the silence, the lull before an awful storm, for the city was preparing for the climax of her existence. It was plainly evident that the auto da fe was about to take place. Muffled figures kept gliding from the houses, moving away in a self-same direction. I need but follow them to reach the scene. But as my soul called up the picture of what was to be acted by the most Catholic king amid 600 heretics, a horror fell upon me. I could not, I dared not, witness the spectacle. I turned and fled as if death in the shape of the Holy Hermandad itself were at my heels. Happily, I escaped from the town. The cold drops on my forehead, my knees shaking with anguish. I fell in a swoon as soon as the terrible gate closed behind me. End of Letter 28.
Letter 29 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 29. Gigantic structures in Earth's parlance may mean the pyramids, or the great works of Babylon and Nineveh, or some Chinese wall of later date. I have not seen any of these wonders, or their ruins either, but I venture to assert that their importance dwindles into nothing by the side of the growing edifice called the City of Politicians here, and that fabric is raised in a single day, meaning the space between one hell night and another. I call it a day. It may be months, years, I know not. City, let me tell you, is an inappropriate term, since, although a dwelling place of many, it is but a single mass, ever added to, but never finished. Between one darkness and another, it reaches colossal dimensions, to break down at last in a heap of shapeless ruin. Night puts a stop to the work, which is begun afresh with every succeeding dawn, yet not quite afresh, the foundations being the same once for all. Indeed, it is they which cause the ever-recurring downfall, for, extensive as they are, covering an area of unlimited vastness, they are hopelessly rotten. Who laid them is a mystery. If one may guess, it must have been Satan himself. But however that may be, those foundations have survived through ages of superstructure and ruin. There are passages through them in all directions, and holes where the workers dwell, something like the catacombs. The city then rises on this base. All the statesmen in hell have duty here as master builders, and of workmen there is no lack. Millions there are, hell continually disgorging them on the spot, and like bees, they bring their building materials with them, working together in virtue of a common instinct like those insects. You have heard it said of this man or of that his conscience is turned to a stone. Now this is no mere figure of speech. Such sayings embody an awful truth. It is a terrible thing, my friend, to have a stone where the conscience ought to be. Every deceitful act, every deed of injustice or want of mercy, helps to petrify your conscience, and some people's hearts are so deadened that every righteous feeling has been displaced by a stone of that kind. No one is free from these dead weights, no one who comes hither, at least, and some drag such loads about with them, that the marvel is they continue alive. Now this city is built of such stones. Some souls there are whose one occupation it is to free the hearts of the petrifying load. Free? But it is hopeless trying. And though stones upon stones be added to the rising structure, the stony heart cannot here be changed. One finds this out by experience only. But some there are, so loaded with injustice, and so anxious to get rid of it, that no experience will convince them. The head and cornerstones are furnished by the master builders, the former experts in statesmanship. It is simply astounding to behold the overwhelming weights produced by men of their antecedents. Indeed, one requires the insight obtained here in order to form an idea as to the extent of treachery, injustice, and subtle craft they were capable of in the days of their earthly life. Among them are to be found the greatest wrongdoers the world ever produced. No one has a more unlimited scope for evil than statesmen, not excepting kings, and their responsibility is awful, for a man might be born heir to some crown and could not help it. But no man can be a statesman without of his own free will undertaking a ruler's duties. They knew what they engaged in and have no excuse. The welfare of millions was in their hand, the power of blessing or cursing. And how did they use it? Look at history. Nay, examine the present time. They seem to believe, these men, that in the interest of politics, as they call it, any amount of evil-doing will pass. Justice? It is an empty sound. The welfare of nations? The power of the state is more than that. They believe themselves exempt from all laws, moral or divine, imagining God, if he judges them at all, will judge them according to some special standard of right and wrong. Treacherous dealings, tyranny, and armed force were their chief ideas of governing. No matter how many unknown subjects might suffer cruel hardship, and behold, the world's perversity judges them by the glittering tinsel of success, calling him greatest who outmaneuvers all others in perfidy. Diplomacy is the current expression. But things are called by their true name here. It is quite apparent in hell that some of the greatest crimes earth ever witnessed were committed in behalf of the so-called higher arts of diplomacy. and that some of the greatest delinquents are to be found among the starred and gartered office-bearers, who are the right hand of kings. But the chief duty of these master builders consists in seeing the profusion of material, their own and that of others, properly disposed. This offers real difficulty, for each of these ex-statesmen very naturally has his own plan to go by. No two of them ever agree, even though they should find themselves stationed side by side. But sometimes they are separated, say 100 miles from one another. Imagine, then, the circumference of the city, and try to imagine these statesmen, one here, one there, building away, heedless of each other. This is the reason why the state is never accomplished. I say state, for the latent idea is to form a state, and when it is finished, to choose a king. There are numbers of landless sovereigns loafing about the outskirts of the city, dreadfully anxious to be chosen. I have spoken of these miserable crown-bearers in a former letter. Our statesmen are sufficiently aware of the difficulty of their undertaking. They are forever sending dispatches in all directions, now cajoling, now threatening, as they hope to gain their end, and their ambassadors creep about from one court, I mean building station, to another, but no amount of diplomatic perfidy avails, and nothing remains but to call a congress at last. But since there is no neutral ground in all the city itself, they fix upon a certain mud island in the Black River which laves the base of this building ground. In order to gain that island they have no choice but to try the experiment of swimming. Now one would imagine our noble diplomatists to be very loath to let the filthy water touch their august persons. But far from it. They like it. You remember that the Black River is fed by all the refuse of injustice and falsehood oozing down from the world. It is quite a sight, I assure you, to see them sprawling in the horrible water. They have reached their own element, it is plain. And like a set of schoolboys in a mill pond, they flounder about quite lustily. No sooner are they landed, however, than behold our dignified statesmen. The Congress is inaugurated with due solemnity, each plenipotentiary falling into his place with singular adroitness, and agreeing with peculiar suavity that a common plan of action must be arrived at. But there unanimity stops. Innumerable proposals are made and rejected, mutual jealousy rendering concord impossible. One motion presently meets with acceptance. Let each representative try and work out his part towards the general aim. Great hopes are aired, and the result is truly ridiculous. The completed scheme proves the most deplorable farrago, but no one is prepared to give up his individual position, and the end is confusion. Vainly the most impressive speeches are delivered about the incomparable benefits of simple honesty in politics, about the infernal balance of power, without which the greatest revolutions and most hopeless complications are to be dreaded, about the eternal laws of the nature of things, about the duties of politics in a beneficent sense, and the moral power of the ruling creed in modern times, which brands with infamy mere brutal force, about the high state of culture arrived at in this 19th century, which alone ought to govern all social questions, about principles of actions which should not be set aside even in hell, about sacred rights which must be upheld at any sacrifice. In short, no parliament on earth could develop greater bombast than a meeting of ex-politicians here. But result there is none, and nothing remains but to raise the Congress. Before separating, however, there is the usual exchange of compliments, a profusion of gratitude for mutual helpfulness and invaluable assistance in unraveling difficult points. The Congress, in fact, is pronounced a success. The trumpets are sounded, and newspapers sing paeans to the deep penetration, the rare discernment, and ingenious sagacity of the great leaders in whom was vested the confidence of nations. The plenipotentiaries, duly elated, retire with amiable expressions of friendly feeling on behalf of their respective cabinets, which, however, does not prevent them in swimming back from casting up the muddy waters against each other. So much for the Congress. And the building continues. Time passes. It is long since the radiance of paradise has last been seen. Light is ebbing away, but they build and build out of their own stony hearts and consciences. The structure arises, an informal mass. The higher it reaches, the plainer becomes the fact that it cannot stand. They have just about attained the crowning cupola, which is achieved by dint of innumerable strokes of policy, when, behold, the towering structure collapses with a thundering crash, heard in the farthermost regions of hell. Each stone is flying back to its owner, and cries of despair die away in a common wail. Nothing remains but the gigantic foundation. The builders have fled in horror, leaving the abject kings cowering in misery, like Marius of old on the ruins of Carthage. It is night, and hell is overwhelmed with the stillness of death, the terrors of darkness ever and anon being broken by the wailings of desolate kings. End of Letter 29.
Letter 30 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Translated by LWJS. Letter 30. Light has all but vanished. My thoughts keep wandering back to Lily, my one chance of attaining at least a semblance of peace. How sweetly she bore up against illness while she was able. What patience, what fortitude was hers to quiet our apprehensions. But she grew restless at last. We thought of returning to Europe as speedily as possible. She, however, entreated to be taken back to Bethlehem, and we could not refuse her. With all possible care we had set about the journey, yet were fearful of consequences on reaching our destination, though Lily assured us she felt better and only needed rest. Hours she passed reclining on a little terrace by the convent wall, where I had spread a canvas to protect her from the sun, I sitting near her. Indeed, I hardly left her now, and may well say that I was sorrowful unto death. It was there that, for the last time, she told me a story, making an effort as though to prove her fitness. Her last story! It was not the effort that overcame her. Her happy smile, the sweet cadence of her voice said so, but death itself. The morning broke. The mists of night that veiled the clefts between Olivet and Jerusalem yielded to the return of life. The Apostle James was coming down the mount, he who was called the Just, the brother of the Lord. He had spent the night communing with God on the mountain, even as the Master had been wont, and he loved the spot where his Lord had wrestled in agony. The apostle was going home, but quitting the olive grove, he tarried a little on the hillside overlooking the valley. The sun was about to rise, a fresh wind scattering the curling mists. Close by lay the Garden of Gethsemane. Brook Cedron murmured below. The royal city opposite lifted her brow, the proud temple sparkling in glory, the temple of which one stone soon would not be left upon another. But James hoped to be spared the awful sight, for he loved his town and people. A solemn foreboding told him he would have run his race before and won the crown. A happy foreboding, for more than town and people he loved his Lord, and to be with him forever would be the fullness of joy. He was about to proceed when a woman came up to him, young and fair, but plunged in grief. She was but 17. Hot tears ran down her cheek, and she wrung her hands. Falling at the apostle's feet, she implored him to pity her. Her husband, she said, had been struck down by a wasting fever and was fast dying. Physicians could not help him, and they were very poor. He must die, alas, and they loved one another so truly." The apostle looked at her in silence, as though reading her inmost soul. He knew her, for she had been present repeatedly when he had proclaimed the good tidings of grace. But faith had not yet taken root in her heart. She clung to the world, and the love of self was strong. It seemed hard to give up the world in the flower of youth, and harder still to yield self. The old man continued gazing at the young woman silently. She felt the power of his look and was troubled, for with all tenderness there was in his eye a solemn seriousness, a holy influence over souls which is born of God. At last he spoke. "Woman, do you love him truly?" "Yes, Father, with all my heart," replied she tremblingly. "As much as yourself?" continued the apostle. "Oh, far more," cried she, sobs breaking her voice. "It is well, my daughter. There is a means by which you may save your husband's life. You may think it hard, but remember it is the only means. Go about from house to house begging charity for him." "Alas, Father, how should alms save him from dying?" "It is not alms of money you shall ask for, but alms of time. All the days or parts of days which good people, for the sake of charity, will yield out of their own lives shall be given to your husband." The sorrowful wife thought within herself that at all events some people were inclined to charity, and that most valued money far more than time, that while cleaving to mammon they wasted many a precious day quite recklessly. She thanked the apostle, and gathering courage went her way. And presently she was seen going about Jerusalem, telling her story from door to door with humble entreaty, speaking of her sick husband whom she loved, and of the servant of God who had directed her to the pity of charitable men. "Oh, have mercy on me," she cried. "Let me not ask in vain. Give me a day, oh, each of you, and God will bless you forever." But it was quite hopeless. Some laughed at her, requesting to know if she were in her right mind. Others pushed her away rudely for even suggesting such a thing. Others again thought it a good joke, but preferred not to join in it. Some few, however, seemed ready to admit the possible efficacy of the remedy, but were none the less unwilling to assist in procuring the means. Their own lives were precarious, they said. They had much ado in order to provide for their families, and should not feel justified in sparing any of their precious time. But strange to say, the very people who were known to waste time most carelessly seemed the least willing to part with even an hour. The poor young wife grew faint at heart, and the cruel taunts she met with from some. So far, Lily, and no further. One of those paroxysms broke the thread of her story, and before long that of her life. She did not recover. The power of life was gone, or rather, it was as a lamp making a few last flickering efforts, suddenly going out in darkness. Years passed. 15 winters had gone over my head. I was no longer young. I remembered at times Lily's broken story, and in some hour of tender emotion I was one day even prevailed on to tell it to a friend, who thought it so admirable that he fain would have known the whole. 15 years, and how little had I tried to spend them in a manner worthy of the lovely memory of her who was gone. But strange to tell, after that lapse of time, a stray number of some periodical fell into my hands. I was startled beyond measure on noticing a little story entitled "The Begging Wife, a Legend of Jerusalem." Could it be Lily's story? It was, indeed, not quite in the manner of her telling, but unmistakably the same, and no other ending would have seemed probable. This, then, is the continuation. The young woman came to the door of a rich money changer. Having learned her trouble, he considered a while, looking at the matter in the light of a possible speculation. The dying man might have money, and no doubt was prepared to pay handsomely for what, after all, was not worth a great sum. How much would he give for a day, a month, a year? Alas, the sorrowing wife must abandon her hopes. Her husband was poor, very poor. Continuing her way, she met a Roman centurion. There was little prospect that he, a heathen, would have a heart for her, the Jewess. But he looked good-natured, and she might try. Indeed, the centurion understood her better than she expected, for if he had not faith, he had superstition enough to make him credulous. "My dear child," he said doubtfully, stroking his grizzly beard, "I would fain help thee, but you see, this life of mine is so uncertain that I know not for a truth whether I have any right to call it mine. I may be dead tomorrow, and by Jove, it would be wicked to grant away what I have not got. Indeed, I am not sure whether it would not be robbing Caesar of his due, for my life is sold to him. But I am very sorry for you, nevertheless. Shall I give you some money?" "But money was not what she wanted," she said so sadly, and the centurion went his way. She next accosted a well-to-do tradesman, the owner of a carpenter's shop, employing hundreds of hands. That man was one of the 10 lepers whom the Lord had cleansed, and of whom one only turned back to glorify God. But he was not that one. The woman happened to address him with the selfsame words with which they had called upon the Son of God. "Master, have mercy on us." But he knew no mercy. Turning to the busy scene in his shop, he answered, "Woman, look at all this work. I cannot nearly meet demands, and yet you expect me to give you of the little time there is? Nay, you must ask elsewhere." But she importuned him. "O master, for Rabbi Ben Miriam's sake, who pitied you, pity me and my husband." The man had not expected to be thus reminded. He grew red, then pale, but found an answer presently. "Well, as you seem to know that story, your request is doubly unfair. Don't you see how much shorter my life is than that of other people, since I can only be said to have lived from the day I was healed of that leprosy? It is really too much to expect me to shorten a life already shortened. Get thee gone, woman. Time is too precious for further talk." Having left the workshop, the poor wife presently found herself near the temple. Now, filled with grief though she was, she forgot not to cast her mite into the treasury, and going up she met a priest who, having executed his office, was retiring from the house of God. "Thou God of Abraham," he cried, drawing his garments about him as she meekly endeavored to kiss the hem, "Thou God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, listen to this woman. Am I to be the victim of her mad request? It is sorcery." "I am neither mad nor given to sorcery," she urged humbly. "Surely this is sorcery," reiterated the priest, looking at her disdainfully. "Beware, lest you be brought into the synagogue to be stoned." She next went to the house of a high-born Syrian of princely parentage who had come to Jerusalem to enjoy his life, and he had enjoyed it, emptying the cup of pleasure to the very dregs. With his appetites blunted, he knew no longer how to waste his time. She was admitted. Through an inner court, a paradise in itself, where statues of whitest marble gleamed between dark-leaved shrubberies, where fountains played and birds united in chorus, where sweet flowerets steeped the air with fragrance, through pillared halls hung with Tyrian purple and enriched with golden ivory, over floors of Roman mosaic, and through doors opened and shut by slaves in gorgeous attire, she reached at last to where the lord of all this grandeur was taking his luxurious repose after the exertion of the bath. She found him reclining on a couch with half-closed eyes. An Abyssinian slave, dark as night, was cooling the air about his head with a fan of peacock feathers, while a Greek girl, fair as the day, stroked the soles of his feet with gentle touch. Both these women were beautiful, each after her kind, but that was not what the poor supplicant thought of. Still less did she consider that she herself, holding the mean between Abyssinian and Greek, united in her own person the beauty of both night and day, with her warm complexion and her lustrous eyes, that the charms of these women paled before hers like stars outshone by the moon. "Woman," said the young man with languid voice, "it is true I care little for life. It is a miserable farce at best. But why should I present you with that which hangs heavy on my own hands? I see no reason. Philanthropy? Pooh! It is give and take in the world. Now, what could you give me of pleasure or amusement that I have not tasted to the full? I loathe life. Go and leave me to myself." Crying bitterly, the poor wife left the house of the Syrian. But hers was a sacred mission. She dared not give up, not yet. There was a certain ruler who lived for his pleasure, and whose liberality invited others to share it. To live with him meant to enjoy, and apart from enjoyment, the world to his understanding was a blank. He had known higher aims, As a youth he had observed all the commandments and had been anxious to inherit life. He was that same young man who came to the Lord saying, "All these things have I kept. What lack I yet?" But he, whom he had called good master, told him, "If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give it to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me." And that was not what the young man had expected, for he had great possessions. It was a turning point in his life, and from that moment he ceased believing in an inheritance beyond the grave. He joined the Sadducees, who said that there was no resurrection, and became one of their most zealous followers. The poor young woman, therefore, could not well have asked of one more unlikely to give. The rich man replied contemptuously, "How foolish and surpassingly arrogant! I have but this one life, and do you expect me to be lavish of it to any chance comer? Know that a day of my existence could not be paid for with all the gold of Ophir. You have mistaken me, my pretty child. You had better apply to the Pharisees." For 2 full days she continued begging from house to house, well nigh exhausting the streets of Jerusalem, but all she obtained was unkindly speeches, if not worse. At the close of the 2nd day she yielded to despair, falling on the ground by the gate of Damascus, tired to death and undone with grief. There she lay with a dull sense of misery. But suddenly the well of her tears was dried, a smile like a gleam of sunshine lighting up her grief-worn face. Fatigue was nothing now. She rose quickly and went to where she knew she would find the apostle. "Well, my daughter, and how have you sped?" asked he with loving sympathy. "Alas, father, men are void of pity. The world is evil, and its sinful desires are for self only." "You say truly. Compassion is with God alone." "Yes, father, and to him, therefore, will I go. No one will give me as much as a single day, and many days are needed to restore my husband to my love. I well nigh despaired, but suddenly I remembered that I had a life, and to judge from my great youth, a long life before me. O man of God, tell me, may I not give of mine own abundance what hard-hearted men are not willing to make up between them? My husband is half my life to me. Let me give him then the half of my life. Let us live together and die together. Or if it must be, let him have the whole. I am willing to die so that he may live." Thus she entreated, the tears flowing down gently over her love-lit face. But the apostle touched her head with a hand of blessing and said, deeply moved, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Thou hast found grace in the sight of God. Depart in peace. Thy husband is given thee, and ye shall live together." This is the story, Lily's last. Ask me not to describe to you the impression it made on me. I felt as though Lily indeed were speaking to me from another world. My tears fell on the page, and I bowed my head, sorrowing not so much for Lily as for myself. One thing I felt certain of even then. Had the choice been given me, I would gladly have divided my life with her. I, selfish as I was, I believe I could have given up the whole to save hers, for I did love her. But now what use was the story to me, save that it moved my tears, a few tears which I was ashamed to show. I endeavor to conclude this letter by the fast-failing light. I tremble at the coming darkness. This fear, I suspect, is chiefly born from a feeling that a night to come, we know not how soon, will usher in the day of judgment. Ah, fearful night, that will bring us to the day when the Son of Man shall come in the clouds of heaven. Lost! It is a terrible word, enclosing all the horrors of hell. Am I lost? Lost forever? Not yet. The forever is to come, says a voice within. But again, is there hope? Is there a possibility of being saved? I cannot say. Both yes and no seem beyond me. Sometimes I do try and cling to a faint shadow of hope, but it darts through my soul as a flash of lightning. I am utterly unable to hold it fast. At times, again, when I have gone through seasons of deepest suffering, a sudden calm sinks down upon me. Dare I think it healing peace? But no sooner am I aware of it than it is gone, and I even doubt that it was. Of course, there can be no such thing as conversion in hell. But I keep asking, might it not be possible that all these terrible sufferings, both of retrospect and of present reality, had power to prepare the soul, that perchance at the moment when it is called out to appear at the great judgment, it will flee to the Savior and clasp his feet for mercy and peace? And if it were so, what if it were thousands of years hence, or tens of thousands? How infinitely precious were this hope! Let me suffer, however long, if so great a salvation were possible in the end. Lily, I know that she loves me, with a heavenly tenderness akin to the Saviour's for his own. And if the power of love, that wondrous mystery, be more than a mere fable, there is at any rate this one bond left between me and life. For I know, my Lily, that bond will never break in all eternity, but a bond which will neither break nor bring about union surely cannot exist in the sight of heaven. And again, could Lily be happy, enjoy salvation without me? That is another question. Can she be content to live when I am lost? And will God deny her what she loved most on earth, what even now in heaven she loves most next to him? I cannot believe it. So this leaves me with a hope centered in Lily, not because she has power to save me, but because she had been appointed to lead me to the feet of the Savior. Perhaps it will be given her to do so in a future age. She may yet show me the cross, even as I, all unworthy, showed it to her when she died. Did she not say with her last breath that we should meet again? And with this sure hope she fell asleep in peace. Is it possible that God would have let her leave me with a peace founded on an untruth, a miserable delusion, even at the solemn moment of entering his presence? Surely it is impossible. So the conclusion seems to lie very near, but I dare not draw it. Again, also, the whole of hell is burthened with a feeling, veiled and but dimly understood, that there is a possibility of redemption before the final word is spoken, when all is at an end. Hope raises her front, however feebly, yea, a great hope, and surely God, being what he is, could never let millions of miserable souls feed on that streak of light if it were mere delusion. Surely not. He is the God of justice, and we receive the due reward of our deeds. But again, he is the God of mercy and unspeakable tenderness, who can never delight in our misery. And he is the God of truth. He cannot let us feed on a lie. And yet, is it not possible also that delusion is part of the punishment, being, like everything else, the outcome of a sin-deluded life? Ah, woe is me! Where is that hope which but a moment since illumined my soul as with a reflection of eternity? It is gone like a false dawn swallowed up in night. I give up. My heart would break, but nothing ever breaks here. Hearts here are strong to bear any amount of misery. No, we are not so fortunate as to break our hearts. I was thinking of something else. There may be a hope left. Nothing certainly could be much worse. Things are desperately fast here and not made for rupture. All is cause and effect, past act and consequence. Indeed, since the word hell seems to have become objectionable with well-bred people, let me suggest their calling this place the world of consequences. Have you any idea that I am writing in an agony of despair? You would shrink back from me in horror could you see me, though perchance you still call me friend. May heaven preserve you from ever seeing me. But I forget, I was trying to finish this letter. It may be long, very long, before you hear of me again, if ever. I still will call you friend, yet it will be natural that if all break, friendship too must vanish. Farewell then, my friend. Please God, we shall never meet. I wrote the above as the awful night was spreading her wings. Oh, how I dreaded its settling. Every renewed darkness brings new agony, new despair, and as soon as the light has vanished entirely, hell is swept of everything with which imagination had endowed it. Towns, castles, houses, parks, churches, clubs, and all places of amusement, everything has vanished, leaving a desert void, and souls unclothed of aught but bare being. Hell is then like a vast dungeon where man and woman, rich and poor, crawl about in utter loneliness. While the light lasted, dusky though at best it is, one could arrange oneself according to one's fancy, having everything one listed, unreal though it were, mere shadows of thought. Still, it is a kind of occupation to surround oneself with imagined possessions. But this terrible night admits of no such jugglery. It leaves me naked, poor, forsaken, homeless, friendless, a prey to bitter reality. I shrink together within my miserable self, not knowing where I am or who may be near me, nor do I care to know, filled with the one thought that I am in the place of lost souls, lost myself. Evil thoughts keep settling round my heart, beleaguering it as the ruthless Romans did the unhappy city of David. This siege, too, ends with a terrible destruction, an agony of suffering, the like of which the world has never seen. As before, I pass the long night shuddering, trembling for outward cold, but with a horrible fire within. You say in the world, and say truly, that there are conflicts in which even strong men fail. Alas, the hardest conflict now seems a happy condition, for here struggling is at an end, as being too good for hell. There is only raving and madness here, a kind of spiritual suicide even, but no struggling for victory. The soul here is a victim, forsaken by the powers of good. Every little devil is permitted to fasten his miserable claws on the helpless mind. Understand me, it is a figure of speech. There are no devils in this place save our own evil desires, passions, and sinful thoughts. Satan at times is here, but thanks be to God, not yet has he final power over the soul. In this very night he was present, come to look on the miserable beings he delights in considering his. Though not always, yet generally, he chooses darkness for his visits. As a sudden whirlwind, felt but not seen, he is among us, and hell is frozen with horror. All the millions of souls then shrink together in an agony of unutterable fear, knowing that one is among them who never knew pity and ruth, the great destroyer, ready to destroy them. And this is the dreadful thing, that though certain of his presence, I feeling it, not one of us can say, "See here, see there." You hear a crackling as of fire. Serpents of flame keep darting across the tenebrous space, showing his path. But where is he, the dread enemy? His consuming eye at this very moment may be upon you, gloating over your trembling soul. I will be silent. I cannot dwell on these horrors. Be it enough to say that again and again I felt myself in the very grasp of the evil one who seemed to dally with my anguish. It took all manner of forms. Suffice it to give one. I suddenly felt as though I were a bottomless ocean in which my sins were swimming about like fish, and the devil sat on the shore, grinning and throwing his lines, using now this evil desire, now that as a bait. He was an expert, catching fish upon fish. Suddenly the float disappeared, dragged down into the deep. A good catch, no doubt. He brought it up triumphantly. O Lord of pity, my own heart, bleeding and writhing. It was horrible, horrible. Let me drop the veil. This, too, is imagination, of course, or, at worst, Satan's own evil pastime with the hopeless mind. But nevertheless, what is there more real than death? And I suffered 100 deaths in that night. At last, I know not after what length of time, hell was given up again to its own state of misery, rising to it with a gasp as out of a fearful dream. Then I felt it a relief almost to be but a prey once more to my own evil thoughts. Bad as it was, to be left to myself seemed gain. As before, the whole of my past life was unrolled to my sight, sin upon sin, failure upon failure, gnawing at my heart till it was but a single festering wound. But with all the suffering, a longing was blended more deep, more burning, than any I had felt before. Not for the life behind me, the world with its pleasures was dead, but for a living soul I thirsted, a soul to understand me. Lily, my father, Aunt Betty, from them I was separated to eternity, a great gulf being fixed between them and me. But my mother, my own mother, there was only death between me and her, and a wondrous truth lies hidden in that word. Love is stronger than death. That was the closest bond, after all, that between my mother and me, the bond of nature. What in all the universe could be better than a mother's love? With a thirsty longing my thoughts turned to her. O mother, where art thou? And here again a great pain side by side with yearning. How badly I had rewarded her love in life. Had I not been her one and all? But she, in truth, was very little to me. How wrongly I had judged her, often thinking meanly of her motives, deeming her cold and worldly, a selfish nature to which the appreciation of society was more than the heart's goodness, to which Christianity even was a mere matter of propriety, in which faith and charity were not strong enough to teach her that self and the world should be sacrificed, but which hesitated not to sacrifice even the holiest on the world's altars to the advantage of self. How wickedly I had thought of her, ungrateful wretch that I was! I grieved for it now. Surely she had been the best of mothers, the most perfect of women, loving and good. These painful thoughts unnerved me. I felt weak and softened. "Oh, mother, dear mother," my heart kept crying with the wail of a child. "I care not if you laugh at me, but I had come to this. I longed for her with the simple longing of the hungry babe for the mother's breast. For the first time the desire was strong in me to return to the upper world, an indescribable power drawing me irresistibly. The ghost nature was fluttering within me, lifting its wings, urging me to go. But my yearning found vent in the cry only, 'Mother, mother!' A faint streak of dawn. My eye fell on a cowering figure, ill-shaped and moaning, sunk in a heap not far from me. An impossible, frightful thought stole through me at the sight. My soul heaved like a storm-lashed sea. The figure moved and turned. God in heaven, that terrible face, ghastly and distorted, it was my mother's. I dashed away in headlong flight. I would not believe it. But alas, my friend, what matters my believing it or not? It was my mother. Poor, poor mother. This is the crushing blow, if such there be here. I thought I had known the worst, but this is awful, awful. What more shall I say? Words are powerless. The despair of hell you cannot conceive. It were poor consolation that being equally miserable now we might weep together, uphold one another, comforting each other in pain. But even that is denied. Tears we have not, sympathy there is not. At least I have not found it. And naturally, since love is utterly unknown here, we can only cower side by side through ages to come, each taken up with self. Fellowship? Nay, but it is worse than desert loneliness. We have not a word to say to one another. We dread to look at each other. Everything between us is cold, dead, dead. We have our own agony of fire, each within the soul, but that fire which goes forth to warm another is as a burnt-out crater filled with the ashes of despair. I can no more. Fare thee well. The End. End of Letter 30, read by Martha Weller, Champaign, Illinois, April 29th, 2023. End of Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted, translated by LWJS.